just waiting on confirmation. Thank you for waiting. Present today with us is a stenographer, Ms. Alonso, who is reporting this hearing verbatim. To ensure we have an accurate record, we ask that everyone speaks one at a time and does not speak over each other. Also, speak clearly and loudly. When needed, Ms. Alonso will stop the hearing process and ask for clarification, and afterward, she will produce the official hearing transcript, which will be available on the Office of Tax Appeals website. As a reminder, the Office of Tax Appeals is an independent and neutral agency. It is not a tax court. All three judges are co-equal decision makers, and we can ask questions at any time. To help the process run as smoothly as possible, please ensure your microphone is not muted when you speak. Otherwise, your voice will not be picked up on the live stream, even though we can hear you in the room. You need to speak into the microphone for it to be picked up on our live stream. And please keep in mind that these proceedings are being broadcast live, and anything said today and any information shared today is publicly viewable on the live stream. With that said, are there any questions before we go on the record for appellant?
No, Your Honor. Thank you.
Thank you. And FTB, any questions?
No.
Thank you. Ms. Alonso, are you ready to go on the record? We are opening the record in the appeal of Fisher and Hickland. The OTA case number is 2100888422. This matter is being held before the Office of Tax Appeals. Today's date is October 15th, 2025, and the time is approximately 1 p.m. The hearing is being convened in Cerritos, California. This hearing, which will begin today and continue on October 16, 2025, is being heard by a three-member panel. My name is Keith Long. As indicated in the revised notice of panel, I am replacing Judge Amanda Fasigue as the lead administrative law judge in this hearing. Judge Kenny Gast and Hearing Officer Erica Parker are the other members of this tax appeals panel. The parties were similarly notified of Judge Gast's addition to the panel in OTA's revised notice of panel. All three panel members will meet after the hearing and produce a written decision as equal participants. Although I will conduct the hearing, any member of this panel may ask questions or otherwise participate to ensure that we have all the information needed to decide this appeal. As a reminder, the Office of Tax Appeals is not a tax court. It is an independent appeals body. The panel does not engage in ex parte communications with either party. OTA will issue an opinion based on the parties' arguments, the admitted evidence, and the relevant law. For the record, will the parties please state their name and who they represent, starting with the representatives for FTB.
Good afternoon, Judge Long. My name is Ellen Swain for the Franchise Tax Board.
And good afternoon. My name is Ron Hofstall, and I represent the Franchise Tax Board as well.
Thank you. And for appellants?
Good afternoon, Judge Long. My name is Lydia Taranchik, and I represent appellants Todd Fisher and Catherine Hickland.
My name is Todd Fisher, and I'm one of the appellates.
I'm Catherine Hickland, and I am one of the appellates.
Thank you. And Mr. Hickland,
Fisher.
Mr. Fisher, sorry. When you speak into the microphone, if you just move it a little closer to you, you're a little quiet.
I think you're the first person to ever accuse me of that.
My understanding of the issues today is that there are three possible issues in this appeal. They are, 1, whether appellants have shown error in FTB's determination that appellant husband was a resident of California during the period at issue. 2, if appellant husband was not a resident of California during the period at issue, whether the income at issue was California-sourced income. And 3, whether appellants are entitled to further interest abatement. However, as documented in OTA's minutes and orders, FTB now concedes that appellants are entitled to interest abatement for the period March 2, 2017 through July 28, 2019. At the pre-hearing conference, appellant's representative indicated that the issue of interest abatement may be withdrawn. Can appellant appellants please confirm whether interest abatement is still at issue in this appeal?
We will leave interest abatement on the table. We are not producing additional evidence today with respect to that issue.
Thank you. With respect to witnesses, my understanding is that there will be a potential 5 witnesses for this hearing. Witness testimony will take place during both sessions of this hearing. The identified potential witnesses include Mr. Fisher, Ms. Hickland, Henry Catrona, David DeSalvo, and Fred Walecki. As discussed in the minutes and orders, appellant will be given a total of 4 hours for witness testimony. An additional 2.5 hours is scheduled for cross-examination by FTB and questions from the 3 panel members. Is appellant able to confirm which witnesses will appear tomorrow?
Judge Long, it is my understanding that Mr. Fisher and Ms. Hickland are here and can testify today. We do anticipate Mr. Catrona, Mr. DeSalvo, and Mr. Walecki all being here tomorrow for their testimony. As I indicated in the pre-hearing, Mr. DeSalvo is a CPA, as this panel is obviously very aware. Today is October 15. This is a brutal tax deadline in LA County. It is possible that Mr. DeSalvo may not be able to be here tomorrow if an emergency comes up, but at this moment, I anticipate him being here.
Okay, thank you. Regarding exhibits, the exhibits for this appeal consist of appellant exhibits 1 through 30. As discussed at the pre-hearing conference, OTA's minutes and orders and OTA's email correspondence dated October 8th, 2025. Exhibits 12 and 14 include lists of the main items relevant to appellant's argument. However, they do not supplant exhibits included in the administrative records such as catalogs of memorabilia. At the pre-hearing conference, FTB did not have any objection to appellant's exhibits. Can FTB please confirm that there are no objections currently?
Yes, Judge, we have no objections. Thank you.
Thank you. Exhibits 1 through 30 are admitted into the record. Prior to the pre-hearing conference, FTB submitted exhibits A through Z. Appellants did not have any objections to exhibits A through Z. Can appellants please confirm whether there are objections to A through Z?
There are no objections pending how they're used at this hearing.
Okay. After the pre-hearing conference, FTB timely submitted exhibits AA through GG. Do appellants have any objections to these exhibits?
We do not. Same statement.
Thank you. Then exhibits A through Z and AA through GG are admitted into the record. Finally, FTB's correspondence dated October 7th, 2025 includes selected pages from the memorabilia catalog. FTB's correspondence states that these pages are not a new exhibit. However, these pages do not appear to be included in any of the already admitted exhibits, nor do they appear to be a part of the existing administrative record. Instead, the select pages appear to be related to a series of web links provided by appellants. I understand the reasons that appellants did not provide the entire catalog of auctioned memorabilia. However, for the purpose of this hearing, did FTB wish to include these pages as an exhibit?
Yes, Your Honor. I think that it makes sense to consider it. I think that the issue with the link that was included in the appellant's brief was that at this point it had just become a dead link. And so we would be really supplementing their opening brief by including those select pages. Well, we can include them as an exhibit if that's easier for administrative purposes.
I would say just for ease of reference,
Sure.
It might be okay. Better to include them as an exhibit. Do appellants have any objection to that?
We do not.
Okay. Then the pages attached to FTB's correspondence dated October 7th, 2025, consisting of select pages from the auction catalog, will be labeled for the purpose of this hearing Exhibit HH. Sorry, I may have a typographical error. October 6th, I'm being told. Either way, I think we all agree to the pages. This appeals hearing is anticipated to take 8 hours and 15 minutes. Appellant's presentation is intended to take 45 minutes for the presentation and scheduled for 4 hours of total witness testimony. I understand that will be spread across the 2 days. Cross-examination and panel questions for 2 hours and 30 minutes, and then FTB's presentation will take approximately 45 minutes. I do anticipate taking periodic breaks throughout this hearing, occurring approximately every 2 hours. For everyone's sake, I think that's a good idea. And appellants, you may begin with your opening presentation. Oh, sorry, one last thing regarding the podium. Our stenographer has asked that during witness testimony we take a break to move the podium to the side of the room so that she's able to see the witnesses as they testify. So we will be doing that after appellant's opening presentation. And with that, you may begin when ready.
Thank you, Judge Long. Thank you to the panel, and thank you, Judge Long. I'd like to introduce my clients, as they have been already. This is Todd Fisher, Catherine Hickland. Let's start with some brief background here. There are 2 years at issue here, 2011 and 2012. And I just want to note for the record, to be clear, we're talking about facts that happened more than a decade ago at this point. All of the proposed California income at issue was generated from the sale of memorabilia owned by Todd Fisher at 2 memorabilia auctions held at the Paley Center in Beverly Hills in June and December 2011. 2012 is an issue only because he received the payments from the December 2011 auction during the following year. We have, as stated by Judge Long, 2 primary issues for consideration today. When did Todd cease being a California resident and domiciliary? Our position on this is clear, and we say supported by the evidence. Todd moved to Las Vegas, Nevada in January of 2010 and never looked back. Second issue, if Todd was not a resident and domiciliary of California, does the sale of the auction items in California subject that tangible personal property to California income tax? Our position on this is also clear. The movement of tangible personal property into a state for the sole purpose of sale does not render it subject to California source, does not render it California source income, and the FTB's position on this issue violates both the plain language of the statutory and regulatory provisions. There's also an element to this case that we do have to address up front, and that is the celebrity factor. Todd Fisher is Hollywood royalty. He's the son and brother of Hollywood icons and a respected collector, sound and video engineer in his own right. His life wasn't normal. This wasn't Leave It to Beaver, which dad working 9 to 5, mom staying at home, 2.5 kids, and 1 2-week vacation represented the only time the family left home. Todd's life was dramatically different, both as a child and as an adult. This fact has to be considered here. Certain things that might be normal for the rest of us are simply not part of his equation. Todd's parents' divorce was front-page news as it involved America's sweetheart in the form of Debbie Reynolds and villain vixen Elizabeth Taylor. Todd's sister, Carrie Fisher, became an overnight sensation with her role in one of the most popular movie franchises ever in Star Wars. The fraught relationship between mother and daughter was the topic of a major motion picture, Postcards from the Edge. And the almost contemporaneous deaths of mother and daughter in December 2016 were fodder for mainstream media, tabloids, and industry rags for weeks. Even Todd's wife, a soap star and acclaimed actress and hypnotist in her own right, was a significant part of the Hollywood scene based on her own work, but also, and somewhat ironically, because of her prior marriages to David Hasselhoff and Michael Knight. And I have to say, Kat, I find it hysterical that your second husband had the screen name of your first husband. They lived complicated lives in the limelight, and this must be remembered when discussing such typically benign topics as home or where we maintain expensive items. For most of us, this calculation is clear. For some, like Todd and Catherine, it's a bit more complicated. With that, let's turn to the issues at hand. First, residency and domicile. I'm not going to spend a lot of time going over the legal standards for those. You guys know those standards well. FTB counsel know the standards well. We're all familiar with them. but I do think it's worth referencing the core standard for each. First, a change in domicile requires residency in a locality and an intent to remain there. Domicile is a matter of taxpayer's intentions as evidenced by his actions. In other words, a change of domicile requires a union of act and intent. To establish a change in residency, as relevant here, a taxpayer must establish that they are outside of California for more than a temporary or transitory purpose. Todd will present the chronology on this, and I am allocating some of my presentation time to his testimony, since what comes out of my mouth is not evidence, but what comes out of his is. But the facts do establish that Todd departed California in January 2010 with the intent to move permanently to Nevada to live with his then girlfriend, then fiance, then wife, Catherine Hickland. His actions over 2010 manifested this clear intent, and there was no intent to return to California in any later year. Todd ceased being a California resident in that year and never looked back. He continues to reside in the same property in Nevada to this day. We will discuss the genesis of Todd's move to Las Vegas in 2010, which started with the death of his wife, Christy, in 2008, and his random reintroduction to Catherine Hickland in 2009 by Henry Catrona. We will discuss Todd's desire to leave the ranch after his wife died. When he met Catherine, Las Vegas became the only option. We will discuss from several different viewpoints, from several different witnesses, the intense beginning to Todd's relationship with Catherine and the clear belief of all who knew them that in 2010, he left his life in California behind. We will discuss why the decisions were made to move into Catherine's house in 2010 and then sell that house and rent while searching for the perfect property in Las Vegas. We will discuss the eventual find of that new property and the creation of the family compound for Debbie, Todd, and Catherine. We will learn how the ranch was maintained in California only at the behest of Todd's mother, who still had memorabilia to be stored. We will discuss the reasons for Todd's return to California in 2011 to deal with the implosion of the museum's dream and the auction of the museum and family memorabilia. Finally, we will establish with certainty that Todd clearly manifested the necessary union of act and intent in his departure from Creston and his new life in Las Vegas. We will also establish, as this has become a bit of a side issue, that Debbie's residence remained in Las Vegas during the years in issue. She spent dozens of years on the road, but when Debbie was not touring, she resided in Vegas during this time frame, visiting Carrie in LA infrequently. We will learn that it was after the years in issue here that Debbie began slowing down and spending more time in California with Carrie. This was memorialized in the documentary Bright Lights, which the FTB apparently misconstrues to have occurred in earlier years. Now, with regard to these issues, we do acknowledge 2 points. First, certain steps were not taken as quickly as the FTB might have preferred. For example, the obtaining of Todd's driver's license in July of 2011.
Could you slow down a little bit?
Yes.
Thank you.
But the irony of the FTB's position is somewhat rich here. That in that if Todd had immediately dotted I's and crossed T's and accomplished all the brag factors, the FTB would have simply said he was doing it to satisfy those brag factors, and it really wasn't his intent to leave. They would make a form over substance argument, and as they have in many other cases. And in many of those other cases, they are correct. Taxpayers often, when trying to depart California, they do dot the I's and cross the T's. That doesn't mean they intended to leave. The evidence here shows Todd actually intended to leave California. Put differently, the FTB's position ignores real life. Yes, he waited a bit to transfer his driver's license and certain other mundane items, just as I did when I moved to California from Virginia. So while the standards espoused by the FTB, which even they admit are a bit out of date, may state differently, these tangential items, when you're making a major cross-state lines move, are simply not a priority and do not detract in any way from his intent to leave the state. Second, we do acknowledge that Todd did spend significant time in California in 2011. There's no question. But the why is critical. Why? Because the auctions were being held in California under the auspices of the bankruptcy court. He had to be there. The family memorabilia had to be transitioned to California, and the museum memorabilia had to be extracted from storage. This also includes the movement of much of the memorabilia back to Vegas and then to Creston from the Tennessee Museum. All of these pieces had to be reassembled, photographed, and cataloged. You will see pictures of the Herculean effort that was undertaken here, and it just took time. Once this process was completed, the entire collection, including both the museum memorabilia and the family memorabilia, was moved to Beverly Hills and the Paley Center, where another Herculean task was undertaken to set up the exhibits. This is the only reason Todd was in California as extensively as he was. It had nothing to do with where he lived or where home was. That was Vegas. California was a work project in 2011 and nothing more. We will present evidence establishing the required union between act and intent in Todd's transition to Vegas and his permanent departure from California in 2011. Now, with regard to the sourcing issue, if Todd is not a resident or domiciliary of California, the FTB may only tax the proceeds received by Todd pursuant to the sale of personal tangible items that they are sourced to California. The applicable statutory provision establishes that in the case of non-resident taxpayers, gross income includes only the gross income from sources within this state. The regulations define sources from within this state as income from real or personal property located in the state. Regulations further provide income from sources within the state includes rents from real or tangible personal property in the state, gains realized from the sale or transfer of such property, regardless of where the sale or transfer is consummated. Put simply, for California to impose tax on the sale of memorabilia at issue and satisfy both the statutory and regulatory requirements, it has to be established the personal property is located in California, regardless of where the sale is consummated. This means the location of the sale of such property cannot serve as the basis for taxation. In other words, the fact that the sale was in California and the memorabilia was brought into California for sale cannot be the basis for taxation. Here, the FTB posits that the presence of the memorabilia in California for purposes of the auction, even for one day, is sufficient as it is therefore located in California. Perhaps recognizing the standard leads to absurd results and is possibly inconsistent with the applicable regulations regarding non-taxability if based on the location of sale, they spend much of their briefing arguing the costumes had a long-term presence in California and thus satisfy the requirements of the statute. To the contrary, we assert that the memorabilia cannot be sourced to California as it has no physical presence in California except for purposes of sale. We look to support for this argument in an analogous, admittedly not binding case out of New York called Idelson, which also has a substantial auction house presence and thus has some of the same motivations as California to perhaps not tax based on a one-day standard. We also assert via analogy that unlike real property, which has a fixed location and thus source in California, the location of personal tangible property like memorabilia is more similar to the presence of human beings, both removable, malleable, and subject to taxation only where and when in the state for a non-temporary or non-transitory purpose. As a result, there is no factual basis to the FTB's assertion that the property should be sourced to California in this matter. The evidence will establish that Todd's memorabilia, being predominantly the Ascot dress, various cameras, and military costumes, were not maintained in California, but rather in Nevada. You will hear multiple individuals testify as to locations of the family memorabilia, including its most famous piece, the subway dress. You will also hear the truth about the backdrop to the Antiques Roadshow episode, which highlighted the subway dress and the Wizard of Oz ruby slippers, as well as numerous references in articles and other sources that came up prior to the auctions relating to these items. It will be clear that the memorabilia at issue was not, in fact, stored in California and only entered California for purposes of their sale at auction. An important component of this sourcing issue is the background. A Hollywood Memorabilia Museum, a dream of Debbie Reynolds. It started with her attendance at MGM auctions in the 1960s and 1970s and culminated with the largest collection of Hollywood memorabilia. The implosion of this museum dream was caused by two significant financial crises, beginning with the terrorist attacks in 9/11 and culminating with the 2008 global financial crisis and the demise of Countrywide Financial. We will discuss the attempts to keep the museum afloat, with Todd spending a substantial amount of time in Tennessee with the governor and its congressional delegation attempting to save the museum in Tennessee. Nothing worked, and the dream ended with the bankruptcy filing in 2009 and the ultimate sale of the memorabilia in 2011. Bankruptcy was required in this matter, and this is a critical component, because the primary creditor, Gregory Orman, was demanding repayment at outrageous terms on the debt that was owed him, and there was eventually no alternative but to file for bankruptcy. We will establish that, in fact, the relevant family memorabilia was predominantly located outside of California, brought into the state only for these presentations, such as the Antiques Roadshow, and then ultimately the auction. We will establish that storing the expensive items in Nevada made far more sense than keeping them in the warehouse in Creston. In closing, put simply, the evidence will show that Todd moved out of California in 2010 and never looked back. His life in Nevada began that year and continues in Nevada to this day. Todd returned to California solely for the sale of the memorabilia. And on that note, the same holds true for the memorabilia. The costumes and equipment at issue here were maintained in Nevada or Tennessee with the family and brought into California solely for purpose of the auction. Taxation of the sale of the memorabilia based only on its presence in California for sale violates both the plain language of the statute and the regulations. And with that, we're going to reserve our remaining presentation time for Todd's testimony and also for our closing. Thank you.
Thank you. I guess we'll take 5 minutes to move the podium. Since we're all back, let's resume. Mr. Fisher, I'm going to reopen the record. Mr. Fisher, since you'll be testifying, if you could please raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do, even so help me God.
Thank you. You may proceed with your testimony.
Thank you. Do you have a preference? Okay, Mr. Microphone.
But you could take that.
Actually, no, Mr.
Sure.
I'll keep going, Daniel. I'm saying.
Yeah.
Is it okay if I leave that on now?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay.
Okay, Mr. Fisher, we're going to walk through a story here. We're going to tell this panel and Franchise Tax Board exactly what was going on in your life as we transitioned from childhood. I promise we're not going to spend a lot of time on the history. I just want to build the background because it is very relevant to what happened to Todd and the bankruptcy of the museums first in the early 90s and then in 2009. So Todd, if we could start with this photo history that you have in front of you, which you have put together, to sort of walk through your background in terms of what was going on in your life, why this attraction, this fascination with costumes, with memorabilia, with movie paraphernalia.
So my mother is an actress by the name of Debbie Reynolds. She was a star, really, in the 50s and 60s, although her first film was in the 40s. Her career spanned 7 decades. She was a fan, even as much as she became a star later, but she was a fan before she became a star. So in 1970, she became a contract player, by the way, starting in the 50s at MGM, which means that you effectively were an employee of MGM. And she made about 70 movies up and through the 60s. And in the 70s, she found out they were going to liquidate MGM Studios. So Kirk Kerkorian, you've probably heard that name before, he was the founder of the MGM casinos, you might be aware of, decided he had taken over the MGM Studios and decided to break it up for pieces, sell off the real estate, which was very valuable. There were about 300 acres in Culver City, but also to sell off the collection of films, which Ted Turner purchased, and also, am I going too quick? Okay. Just looking the way you were looking at me. And my mother was the largest purchaser of costumes, props, furniture, with the intent of starting a Hollywood museum. For some reason, she became obsessed with this in many ways because of being a fan, but also her friendship with others that had come before her, such as Mary Pickford, who was a silent film star, started a company by the name of United Artists. And that she had tried to build a Hollywood museum in the 60s and was not able to do so. My mother tried to help her. So this was a chance, though, uniquely, to save this memorabilia. These were the greatest films that had ever been made in the history of the film industry, the greatest stars, what you'd call from the golden era. And it was all going to be sold off and scattered around the world. And she freaked out about this and said, we need this to be kept in this country and to be in a Hollywood museum. That became her quest for 5 decades. I was a teenager at the time. In fact, I believe we even have, there's the catalogs. David Weiss handled the auctions. There were thousands of items. Picture in the upper corner, I guess, there it is. That's her at the auction. She became, the newspapers said she was crazy. Like, why were you there saving all this stuff? What are you doing? Debbie Reynolds has lost her mind. Well, there's the brass bed from the Unsinkable Molly Brown, for example. I mean, this was something that helped make her career, make her very famous. She was nominated for Academy Award for that role. And here they are selling off a key artifact from that movie as well as all the costumes. So she saved most of these things, everything from the ruby slippers to Judy Garland's gingham dress. You can see a lot of different things here. This was pictures. I'm going quickly because I know you guys have time, but the wardrobe department was like a football field. There were thousands of costumes. In the end, just from the MGM auction, she acquired approximately 2,000 costumes. I mean, maybe it doesn't sound big to you, but this is a huge thing to do. Now, there's a picture of me, so you can get an idea how old I am, at the auction with her. The guy in the background, this is a spelling one for you, is Jerry Wunderlich, just phonetic, Wunderlich. Yeah. And he was a famous set decorator, and he was with her helping her choose famous furniture pieces for the museum. And I happened to be with her. There's a lady in the left-hand corner. That's my grandmother, my mother's mother. So the whole family kind of is getting caught up in this. Carrie and I both were at these auctions, and we watched my mother amass all of this stuff. Well, now that you've bought all this stuff, what do you do with it? Now you have like massive amounts of stuff. Imagine what you could, like 2,000 costumes doesn't fit in here, in this room we're in. We lived at 813 Greenway Drive. This is a home in Beverly Hills. We spent 13 years of our lives there. Carrie and I grew up there. My sister referred to it, she said it looks like a mausoleum or a museum. It's funny that it would actually become the place where the museum artifacts were initially going to be stored. They were stored at that house. There's a picture of my mother actually in the room where things were stored at that house. Now, it became pretty clear pretty fast that you can't, the purpose of this is not to put it in your basement. And just so you understand, in my lifetime growing up, throughout my entire life till much later in life, there was not one piece of Hollywood memorabilia on display in our homes. Way later in life, my mother decided, when we weren't doing the museum, to put out a pair of the ruby slippers and the Maltese Falcon, a couple things. But never costumes, posters, nothing was ever on display. Why is that? Because she had collected it for all of us. She had collected it to save it so we would have a Hollywood museum. Now, starting in the 70s, very early on, many locations became under consideration. This is the Pan Pacific building, currently where the Beverly Center is. This was offered up by the city of Los Angeles as to be a museum location. And we had plans drawn up to put the museum in there. And it was like, this is going to happen. But like what happened many times over 5 decades, something always went wrong. And the last minute, the funding was not there. The industry, much of the movie stars, really didn't care about this dream because they were not really fans like she was. They were just movie stars. I say just. There's a familiar building. This eventually becomes the Academy Museum, but it was offered again back in the 70s to my mother and her people to put the Hollywood Museum into that location. Now, in the middle of all of these different locations, this is what was called the Cars building and other things. In the middle of all of this, it becomes clear that that there's a struggle in making this happen. So she's soliciting help from, the industry, which really had no interest. And the problem is, where do you keep all of this stuff? How do you keep it safe? What do you do with it? Now, at the Greenway house, which is the house I said we grew up in, which is where this stuff was stored right up to this point, we had problems. The subway dress, which is something that's become a focal point of this hearing, had been stolen while it was at our home at the Greenway House. And the FBI was called in. There were several pieces stolen, including the subway dress. And my mother was undone. She knew at that moment that this is probably one of the most famous, will be perhaps the most famous costume in film history. And the FBI called everybody together like an Agatha Christie movie and questioned all the help and said, if this stuff reappears in the next 24 hours, we'll drop this matter. Well, in 24 hours, that dress came back. My mother, though, never got over that, and she started to treat different parts of the collection differently. It was obvious to her that some parts of the collection were extras costumes, let's say. Maybe they're magnificent extras costumes with gold and silver thread, but they're not hero costumes. They're not worn by the big stars. They're not Monroe, Betty Davis, Katharine Hepburn, Gary Cooper. They're not those big names. So at a certain point, my mother started deciding what she thought was important to her and she didn't want to see missing for any reason, and started to keep it with her wherever she might be. And so one of the goals became, we can't have this stuff at the Greenway House anymore. We need to have a permanent home. So she went shopping and bought a post office depot in North Hollywood. This also became the Debbie Reynolds Dance Studio, quite by accident. Initially, it was just a depository where we were putting the collection as a place to try to keep it safe where it could be secured. But she decided, well, this other area over here, I could rehearse for my next Vegas show over here if we set this. We're not using all the square footage. It was a big building. It was 18,000 square feet. So she started rehearsing her shows there. And then other people said, well, can I use that room, that rehearsal room? And she, like Anne Margaret and Shirley MacLaine and other people that were doing Vegas acts. And pretty soon, DR Studios was born simultaneously just because it was going to be a storage building. It started to become a rehearsal studio. So pretty soon, the collection's getting pushed into different areas in this building, and other parts of the building are going to be converted into rehearsal space. Eventually, this became the most famous dance studio ever, and everybody from Fred Astaire to Michael Jackson danced in that studio, rehearsed in that studio. The Thriller album of Michael Jackson was rehearsed and choreographed inside of that building, right behind those very walls, in fact. So this became the home for many years of where this collection was going to be housed while we were looking for a permanent museum to put it in. So it's sort of a segue because one after another, these other places came up. That was taken in DR Studios. The collection at this point was not being stored at what we'll call archival museum levels. We didn't really understand at this point how to preserve textiles. So we did our best. I was not really involved, by the way, at this point. At the DR Studios point, I was building a recording studio in that very building and wasn't paying very much attention to where this collection was being stored. So this leads us to kind of a jump forward, but you can imagine there were about 5 failed attempts to build a museum. I mentioned the Pan Pacific building, the Cars building. The Cars building was a building right next to Grauman's. It was like a great location for this. She actually moved big chunks of the collection there. Didn't happen. There was a flood. It all turned out there's always some kind of a problem historically. This leads us up to something that we had control of. My mother calls me one day from Las Vegas, and she says, I'm going to buy a hotel casino in Las Vegas. And I'm like, what? Now, just to back up a little bit, Carrie and I had spent our lives with her in Las Vegas. Starting in the 60s, my mother in 1963 began performing in Las Vegas. Carrie and I were with her when this used to go on. Carrie and I both sort of considered ourselves to be what we used to call dual citizens of Vegas and Beverly Hills, because we really spent a lot of our time in Vegas growing up. And we eventually performed in my mother's show, starting when we were 7, 8, 9, 10, all the way up into our teenage years. So, but at a certain point, I decided I didn't like that side of things. And you can imagine my sister did like those side of things. And I'm glad she did, because without that, we wouldn't have Princess Leia. So she chose that path. I chose behind the scenes. That's why my mom called me. She said, I bought a casino. I would like you to build and design the showroom for me. So I went to Vegas. This was what was the old Paddle Wheel Hotel. It became the Debbie Reynolds Hotel and Casino. It's on Convention Center Drive. No longer there. It was 6.5 acres, 220 hotel rooms, and quite a bit of square footage that wasn't being used for as big of a casino as could be there, which would later become our museum. So we decided in 93, after we got the showroom open, we decided, you know what? We need to build a museum ourselves. No one else is going to do this. Let's just go for it. So myself and my mom, we raised the money to build a 10,000 square foot Hollywood museum inside that building. We also acquired a pickup truck and this trailer to move the contents from Debbie Reynolds' dance studio, which is where it had been stored really since some of those failed attempts, but let's just say from the MGM auction forward. And we started bringing everything to a new room that I had constructed inside the hotel. This is in 1993, 94. Everything was there. Museum opened in 94. It was a huge success, the museum and the casino. The only problem was that her husband, my mother's third husband, extorted $10 million from the hotel, gaining control of certain areas in the hotel. We ended up with a judgment against him for $10 million in the Nevada courts. We ran him into bankruptcy. He ran back to Virginia. It turned into a fiasco. We really collected very little from him, but he effectively ran this company into jeopardy and eventually had to file bankruptcy protection because of so much had been stolen.
Todd, can I stop you for 1 second?
Yes.
While we're in this 1990, 1994, 95 timeframe, can you discuss what was going on in your life personally and your own residency issues in that timeframe?
Good point. When my mother asked me to come to the hotel, it was initially just to build and design a showroom for her. So I was like, sure. So what does that mean? Like I'll come in for a couple of months, 6 months max, we'll build a showroom, and I'm gone. Well, what happened because of this money being stolen from the hotel, the lender, which was the main lender bank for the hotel, said, unless you get somebody in here to run this thing right now, we're going to have to foreclose on this property the way it sits. They said me. I didn't want to do it, but they put me up as CEO in charge of this hotel. It was a public company at the same time, so I had to take over the public company. I had to take over what was a partial timeshare business on the top floors. And then we had the hotel, the casino, the bars, everything else. And I had to get my gaming license and liquor license and all of this. Well, that meant a change for me because that meant I'm not going back to California. Now, I had purchased the ranch, quote unquote, in about I think I optioned it in 1988, but by 1989, I purchased a ranch in San Luis Obispo County, 44 acres, and that was with my wife at the time. We didn't actually get married. We were, I guess you call it community, what do you call that? What is it called? There's a name for it. I'm not sure what it is, the legal term. But anyway, she had 3 children, and we raised those children on that property all the way up through till she passed away in 2008. But that ranch was where I was at this time. David DeSalvo, who you're going to meet tomorrow, has been my family CPA for decades. In fact, he even had an office at DR Studios. Right next to the memorabilia at one time. DeSalvo, DeSalvo. Does that help? Okay, just checking. David was doing my taxes this time, and when I was at the hotel, he said, well, what's going on? I said, well, I've just taken over as CEO. I'm going to be here for a long time. And he's like, okay, well, we'll switch your residency over to Nevada. And I said, okay, well, you're the man. My whole family had trusted him to do all of the trusts, my mother personal, my sister personal, everybody. So I became, for the first time, a Nevada resident. Now, that very year after he filed, we were challenged by the Franchise Tax Board as a residency issue. David handled the challenge at that time, and after whatever, I don't even know what happened because David handled it, but very quickly they dropped that case. Seeing as that I had, now keep in mind, I still own this farm in California, and it's an operating farm with my wife and these 3 stepchildren. But I'm working in Nevada running my mom's hotel. I don't even own any property in Nevada at this time. But I became a resident. The Franchise Tax Board accepted my residency at that time. I did buy a house about a year later, just as a side issue in Nevada. My mother, of course, had a home in Nevada since the 70s, really the late 60s. So whenever we would visit
Mr.
Los-
Fisher?
Yes, sir.
I'm sorry to interrupt. Just so I have the timeline right. When did you buy the Nevada house?
The Nevada house was purchased in 1994.
Okay, thank you. And then how long did you have that house for?
I kept it to about 2000.
Okay, thank you.
I might as well finish that little part of the story because when the hotel filed for bankruptcy, which was in late 2007, 1997 to 1998, we filed Chapter 11 to reorganize the hotel. We had a reorganization plan that was rejected by the unsecured creditors, and the hotel was liquidated. Right at the filing time, we moved the collection from the hotel itself into storage in Las Vegas, right down the street from my mother's condominium, which she had had since the 70s. This was a big building because it about 6,000 square feet, because the entire contents of the storage plus the entire contents of what was on display in the museum and around the hotel had to be stored. The reason why this was done is that the attorneys were concerned that the creditors might try to go after this collection, even though there were different owners of the collection. They were afraid, so they had to segregate it. Now, this brings up an interesting point, is the terminology. There are a lot of terminology problems that have come up in this case. Collection is one of them. When I say the collection, I'm talking about the entire collection, 3,000 costumes, 10,000 artifacts, but it's owned by several entities. There's a 501c3 nonprofit that was started in the 1970s that my mother had been donating things into over the years. There was then Debbie Reynolds Studios, DR Studios, where I mentioned everything got stored. She eventually had put ownership of many of these costumes into DR Studios. Side note, she also established the Children's Trust at this time. The beneficiaries of the Children's Trust is Todd Fisher and Carrie Fisher. We owned DR Studios. So effectively, not only the building, but the contents and the collection that was maintained at DR Studios was in the Children's Trust. This is how it stayed out of the hotel bankruptcy at that time. So the end of this is the collection is stored in these buildings. My mother comes to me and she says, we can't just rent this building here forever. I said, let me build a storage building at the farm for the collection. I can build it. And at the time, by the way, I probably spent maybe $100,000. It wasn't very much. You put a foundation in, we built a metal building like you see on TV. This became, when it was ready, we moved the collection for the most part, especially the part of the collection that belonged to the nonprofit. We moved everything to California at that point. So this is 1999. Let's just use that as a time frame. My mother, though, kept maintaining things that she felt were important in her condominium in Vegas. This is something she had been doing literally going way back, but she started doing it more particularly when she was concerned about things happening to these artifacts, especially Marilyn Monroe.
Why don't you roll the slides forward a little bit? Pick up some of the actual displays of this.
Sure. So this is, there is that trailer again, by the way, with the truck. That was the truck and the trailer that was used to move the collection from DR Studios to Vegas. It was also the truck that was used to move the collection back to the ranch in 1999. If you notice on the next slide, or you see it right there, those are what we call gondolas. We eventually built ways to store the collection and to transport using these rolling gondolas. You could hold 25 to 40 costumes inside of a rolling cart. That was the showroom in Vegas that I built and designed for my mother. Obviously, that was different. That should have been probably earlier. This is out in front in the hallway going into the movie museum or up to the Star Theater, shot from the hotel. Okay, there's the bankruptcy. You're right, I'm catching up with myself. I think I talked fast at the slideshow. There was the hotel when it went up to auction. That's when it, so there we are. The warehouse wasn't finished until, I'm going to say, like I said, 89 to 90. Debbie had always maintained what I'll say, things that were important to her, and kept certain things with her. The ruby slippers, fairly small things. I mean, you could move everything that she had segregated in one car. Although the DR Studios always maintained a van. We always kept a van. And there were she had assistants over the years that handled moving her stuff around for her, whatever that might be. But Vegas, at one point, had almost everything. DR Studios had some stuff residual left over from the hotel days. But the goal was to get everything that we could, especially everything that was owned by the nonprofit, into the warehouse at the ranch, which is what was done. I had different little collections of my own. I collect cameras and lenses. I collect certain weapons. When my mother was collecting costumes, you saw how old I was, I said, hey, I mean, like the guys are not going to, where's the swords and the guns? The guys are going to want to see the swords and the guns. I mean, and she's like, yeah, you're right. We should have those. So she started allowing me to collect things that went with the big collection. And then I talked her into the cameras. I said, well, hey, what about the camera that made the movie? Wouldn't that be kind of important to be able to show people the types of cameras that made these movies? And, she loved history and loved preservation, and so she was an easy sell on this, and that's also how you roped me into this. So there's the finished building that was built in Creston. It was 6,000 square feet. It really, if you look at the next slide, it's just a steel building, what they call a butler building by some terminology. But you'll notice that, it's made out of TGI beams and whatever. And this is an early picture taken where everything was sort of just dumped there. We, over time, got more and more organized and tried to get things more and more focused so we would be able to more properly preserve. In fact, here's the next slide. Ooh, it's stuck. Oh, it's in the note mode. Hang on. Why is that? Let's see. There it is. Okay. So you could see, this is where we started to get a little bit more organizing. We had a fairly large film library as well, and all the films and archives were kept at this same location. And then you notice also on the left side of the right-hand picture, there are banker boxes and things of that nature. So my mother started sending records and things over to this warehouse as well. So at some point, the family archives and tax records and just archives, contracts, whatever, paper archives is a good way to put it. But there was also things that were memorabilia, scripts, things like that. Okay, so obviously the end goal is not to end up on a farm in Creston, California, which is San Luis Obispo County in the middle of nowhere. She always wanted the Hollywood Museum to become a reality. So I was approached by Hollywood and Highland. I'm not going to do this name for you. It's a horrible name. The developer was called Trizic Hahn.
Todd, let me spell that because I actually did look it up.
You looked it up.
You were struggling. It's Trizechahn.
The developer was building a huge retail mixed-use complex on the corner of Hollywood and Highland. Now, this is year 2000. They made us an offer we couldn't refuse. They offered to give us the entire nose of that building, which you see here in glass, 3 stories tall, represented about 30-some-odd thousand square feet, which was a dream for us because we had always been jammed into about 10,000. Now, to give you an example, when we had the hotel, we had approximately 400 costumes on display at any one time, but there's 3,000 costumes in the collection. Now, granted, some of these are more famous than others. Obviously, but the truth is we could only display approximately 10% of what we had on any hand. This was going to allow us to put about 30% of the collection on display. So we began construction on this. Now, we also at this time had to take on debt in order to help with our end of this deal. They were paying for certain things, and we had to pay for other things. So we went to Gregory Orman, O-R-M-A-N, who was a friend of mine from Las Vegas days, and we borrowed $1 million from him, which was what we needed as our obligation to fulfill as tenants to this building. We had a 25-year lease. We had a lot of very favorable terms. They were paying for all the build-out, and everything was going great. And then 9/11 hit, and they went under. it put that developer out of business, and it left us holding the bag on that property. Now, the collection had not been moved, unlike what happened in Tennessee, where we were just building here. But there are very elaborate pictures. You can see there's our board of directors. That's Robert Stack on the right, Janet Lee. You see my sister next to my mom. Jack Haley Jr. On the far left. Am I going too fast again? Okay. At any rate, you know, we had the support of the entire Hollywood community. We had the support of the city of Los Angeles. I mean, everything was going great, but with the developer going under, that cratered that deal. And so just as fast as we were all thinking we were finally going to get this museum, it didn't happen. And that was after the build-out was substantially done. So that left us holding the bag on that debt. So for about a year or so, we were looking for a new location. And I could not find anything, and I was thinking, man, this is not good, because I don't know where we're going to get this $1 million. And keep in mind that the museum, the nonprofit, had really been the lender, but the other entities, meaning the Children's Trust and Debbie personally, had guaranteed this note, this $1 million. So it was cross-collateralized with the whole collection, including the subway dress. Even though the subway dress was never at the ranch at that moment, he knew about it. He wanted that as part of his collateral. So everything had been cross-collateralized. So I get a call from a developer in Pigeon Forge, Tennessee. Now, I don't know about you, but when somebody says they're calling from Pigeon Forge, Tennessee, you don't really take the call seriously. So I blew the guy off because I don't know what Pigeon Forge, Tennessee is. I thought it was a joke. He kept bugging me and calling and calling. Finally, he explained what it was, and he dropped Dolly Parton's name. He said, well, Dolly Parton has Dollywood here. And I'm like, okay, then run this by me again. He said, look, if you'll agree to come here and be one of our anchor tenants, we will take on that debt for you, and we will pay for any building you want to build here up to, I think he said, $8 million. And I'm like, okay, let me come on down to Pigeon Forge, Tennessee. So I flew to Pigeon Forge, Tennessee. I made that deal. And there's the island before anything was built. It was surrounded by water on two sides, which is why they called it an island, although it wasn't really on a major river. But it was a huge piece of property. There's a rendering in the early days of what was proposed for the museum itself. And so very quickly, I had to spend a ton of time there because I'm now going to build a 115,000 square foot building. And it's big for me. This is the biggest thing I've ever built. It has 3 theaters. It's the biggest thing I've ever designed or built. So I have bought an RV, and you see it in that picture right there. And there it is in that picture there. And that became where I lived while we were building and designing this project. Now, you notice there's trailers and containers there. We also began moving parts of the collection that were going to be needed for the opening and for the early exhibits. The way that museum was designed, I don't know if I have a picture of it later. That's some of the memorabilia that had been moved to the office. There's parts of the collection. So really everything that, let me see if I can, okay. So looking at this, there's the riverboat in the middle there at 90% complete. It's 130 feet tall. So it's 13 stories tall. But there are 3 huge theaters in it. I mean, this is a crowning jewel of anybody's. It's a dream. My mother's dream had finally come true. We were so elated. So within that exhibit, there were 3 theaters that were themed. For example, there was a thing called the Epics Theater. An epic is a film which I can call like an epic movie. Even Star Wars is an epic, of course. But Ben-Hur, Mutiny on the Bounty, or certain movies, Cleopatra. These movies were epics, and the films were huge and shot in widescreen formats. So we were going to show people these films in their original formats while looking at these costumes on display. So we very quickly started outlining not only what was going to go in the theaters, but what was going to go on display in the pavilions. Now, there were themed pavilions, such as comedy, such as war, such as westerns. Obviously, what goes in the westerns pavilion are western movies. Comedies are movies that are comedies, romance, etc. So there's only so much square footage, even though that sounds huge, where you still are only going to send about 30% of the collection. But even 30% of the collection is going to take some time. So we began very early transporting the collection. That's why I was showing pictures of these trailers and things arriving, with pieces of the collection and how it was being stored. Some things were going inside, some things were being put into air-conditioned rooms. There's the opening supposedly in '08. There's the island really in '08. And all of a sudden we have the economic collapse of '08. Now, the really bad news here is that the construction lender is Countrywide. And as you guys probably remember, maybe you do, maybe you don't, Countrywide went under. That caused a big problem because they were the bulk lender. Regions Bank owned the title on the land and some of the liens, let's call it. But the main lender was Countrywide, and they went under. And Bank of America, as you might remember, took them over, and they refused to go forward with any deal that they had on the table. So this was canceled. I went to the governor, I went to the senators, I went everywhere, and I said, hey, let's float a bond, let's do whatever we have to do. You're 90% complete. If you remember, Obama at the time is going, shovel-ready projects qualify, right? And I'm like, dude, thing's 85% done. It's going to employ 3,000 people. Let's get this thing finished. So I had a lot of politicians on board, but everybody was very gun-shy in the middle of that collapse. And I don't think people really knew that the collapse was done collapsing. So it was impossible to secure the financing. Now, in the meantime, the lender has been trailing his debt for several years now, with promises to be paid. He is using compounding interest rates and other things. I was able to hold him off in the California courts. They have a fantastic law in California, and I'm not a big fan of certain laws in California, but this one I really like. It's the usury laws. In California, they have maximum interest rates that can be charged on a loan. So we went in there and said, this guy can't possibly charge us. And the courts agreed with us, and they essentially said, sorry, buddy, you can have your original money plus this rate. And we bought a lot of time doing that. But in the end, he ran back to Kansas City. And in Kansas City, they still wear cowboy hats and boots in the courts, and they didn't care about usury laws. They're like, hey, man, whatever, you owe him $8 million. The number, I think, is what he was trying to collect. I had no choice but to file for Chapter 11 for the nonprofit. In particular, that led to my mother filing bankruptcy as well. So we had, in order to keep him at bay, so to speak, we had to file bankruptcy. Now, right at the same time, this is literally what's happening. That's me, by the way, in the museum. You can see the interior is already in its build-out stage, where we're literally hanging drywall, getting ready to decorate certain floors. Now, what happens in bankruptcy court, Orman and I now Kat and I, it comes into the picture.
Let me stop you here, because we're kind of a juncture for a couple of different things. So we're professionally, we are your bankruptcy for the museum in 2009. Let's talk personally. What else was going on in your life in 2007, 2008? So
in 2007, which is really in the middle of some of this stuff, Christy, my late wife, was diagnosed with esophageal cancer. And basically till the summer of '08, she suffered pretty horribly from that disease. And we kept, a lot of things were in motion. The world didn't stop. But needless to say, that caused some serious up hurdles within the family. Now, you got to remember that I didn't really get into any details, but when I bought this ranch in California back in '89, it was because I was with Christy and she was a rancher. Now, you might ask yourself, what were my skills in 1989? Well, they surely were nothing to do with ranching, other than I had seen a lot of movies about ranchers. So I was attracted to, like, John Chisholm, when John Wayne played that character. And I also wanted a black and white paint horse, because that's what Little Joe Cartwright had. So I went promptly out and bought myself a horse and got thrown off almost immediately. But she was the rancher. The dream was to build a ranch, and that is what happened. She continued to build we'll call it a working farm / ranch. It became an organically certified farm. It actually had contracts with the United States government for crop testing with canola crops and some other crops that she had in experimental phases with the United States government. And it was very unique for me to be involved in it, and it was challenging, but it was really her dream, which became sort of my dream, to make that happen for her. This is sort of what you do when you have a person that you're with. So when she passes away in '08, she and I had already discussed selling the farm all the way back in '06 even. I like to say it like this. I bought the ranch when I was 30, and it was a great idea. When I was 40, it was starting to turn into a little bit of work. By 50, it's major work to own a ranch, a lot of work. And now, of course, I'm substantially older than that, so it's like, forget it. So she and I had already talked about getting out of that business even before she died. Now, once she got cancer, then it was obviously a no-brainer. If she survived that, we would have sold the ranch for sure. But anyway, she stayed there till the very end. That's what you wanted me to go back and cover, right?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, so what's interesting about that is it does lead us up to where we are here, where we're now filing bankruptcy. It's also leading up to me meeting Kat. And you want me? Am I heading down that path yet?
Let's just focus on the bankruptcy for just a
Sure.
second, because this is obviously important. You've discussed before this idea of a domino effect and the idea that 9/11 sort of caused this whole thing. Can you just explain that a little bit further?
Well, as I mentioned, there's a history of this thing just not being able to happen. But when 9/11 hit, that wiped out Hollywood and Highland. But, the idea that the entire lending system was upended was, to me, almost like unconscionable. We were stunned, and no one could imagine such a thing happening. And the idea that we found ourselves back in a position where we had to protect ourselves again, to protect the collection, etc. There's only one problem. This is the first time the collection was ever in jeopardy. Never before in history had the collection ever been used as collateral. Never before it had been in jeopardy really at any time. But this time there was actually a UCC filing against the collection. So, when we filed for bankruptcy, I became the trustee. One of the first things that became of issue is how are you going to raise this money to pay off this debt, and what is the debt? So we were going to do a knockdown drag out with the judge eventually going to decide on how much is really owed. But in the middle of all that, Greg Orman and I went into the back room and we slugged out a deal where we wouldn't have to waste the court's time and everything out. And I forgot the amount right now, but it was, say, $4 million. Pick a number, I don't recall. But we picked a deal it was I could swallow and that he wanted. So we came back into the court and we said to the judge, okay, she's like, holy mackerel, I'm thrilled that you guys, saved me a lot of time here. And okay, so how are you going to pay the debt? And then a fight became over how we would liquidate the collection. My mother basically said, if we're going to liquidate the collection to that extent, to raise that kind of money, we have to face facts that for 5 decades I've been trying to do this. It's just not going to happen. And even though it was my dream, and I appreciate that you have stuck with me in the trenches on this and fought to the death, we got to face facts. So we decided that we would sell the entire collection at that point, wherever the collection was. Now, at that moment in time, a lot of the collection is still sitting in Tennessee. A lot of the collection, some things my mother still has, and a lot of stuff is still at the ranch. But it's decided we are going to hold a big auction. So we choose a company, Profiles in History, which has subsequently been acquired by a different company called Heritage out of Texas. But they came in with the best deal for us and gave us the most control. I was ordered by the bankruptcy court to supervise the gathering, the preparation, the displaying, and the auctioning of the collection, and of course to ensure that the creditors are paid. So when she was talking earlier, I hadn't heard it quite phrased that way before, but in effect, the only reason why I was there doing what I was doing is because that's the only way the collection could be maintained, properly sold, properly photographed, properly represented. And if you look at some of the exhibits, some of which are provided by the Franchise Tax Board, you'll see how lovely the photography was. You'll also see that, ironically, my mother's dream in some really weird way had come true. We had decorated the Paley Center into a Hollywood motion picture museum, and it was drawing crowds around the block. Thousands of people from around the world came to see this collection, knowing that it was possibly going to be scattered to the four corners of the earth. But they just showed up in droves. And my mother was gratified, at least in that respect. But she was also panicking that we weren't going to raise enough money to even pay off Orman, and she would end up with nothing and the collection would be gone.
Todd,
Now,
let me stop you here. Well,
Yeah.
you're taking a breath. Let's focus in now. We are now in this end of 2009, 2010 timeframe. What happens in your personal life?
Well, the last trip that I took to Tennessee was with this little girl here. And what had happened is we had a mutual, very close friend, Henry Catrona, Cutrona, and he will be testifying tomorrow. Henry also happened to be her pastor and a person that I co-founded a church with back in the 1980s, early 1980s. I called up Henry one day, and because we're best friends, and I said, hey, what's going on? He lived, by the way, Henry had come to work at the hotel with me back when I took over the hotel. He became the chief operations officer. He was incredible with people, obviously, and he became sort of an operations and human resources person. So he worked at the hotel. So he moved to Vegas. Well, interestingly enough, he meets his wife there while the hotel was going on. He's with her to this day. But he's got a little recording studio in his house, and I called him just to check in with him. And this is basically 2009, and late 9, I'm guessing. And I called him and I said, hey, what are you doing? He says, oh, I'm sitting here with Catherine Hickland. We're working on her show, for her hypnotism show she's going to take to Off-Broadway. Do you remember her? And I'm like, not really. And he goes, oh, yeah, you'd remember if you saw her picture. So he gets me to look her up on Facebook, and I look at her picture, and I go, oh, she's beautiful. And he says something to me like, yeah, and she's single, And so the wheels are turning in my mind. And I thought, well, now I have been a year and a half out of circulation since the death of my wife. My sister is bugging me to death about knowing that I'm not a person that should be alone and all of this nonsense. And so she was trying to set me up with people. So was my friend Fred Walicki, Walicki. He will be here tomorrow. Ecki.
I got trouble for that spelling in the brief.
Did he jump you?
Now.
Anyway, Fred been my friend for decades as well, and he was trying to find a wife for me. I got everybody out shopping for me, But anyway, I looked her up, and we started to communicate over Facebook. Now, I never in my life have communicated with anybody over social media, ever. And so it just turned into phone calls. And eventually I'm like, look, we've got to meet. This went on for many, many weeks, in fact, of just communicating. And I said, well, she did not want to meet right then because she had a broken foot. And she had a cast on her foot, or one of those boots. And she wanted to wait till she was in better shape. And I just could not wait, based on everything that had been said and everything that was going on. I said, look, I'm coming to Henry's house with my RV. I'm going to park in front. If you want to see me, great, come on down. Otherwise, whatever. I'll just wait till your boot comes off. I mean, I'm used to hanging in Vegas. I've spent most of my life coming back and forth to Vegas for various reasons. By the way, when I moved back to the ranch in 1998, David DeSalvo came to me and he said, so you're back at the ranch? Yes. How much time are you spending in Vegas? I said, not a lot. I have the house there, this and that. So what does David DeSalvo do? He says, we need to switch your residency back to California. So immediately, as the rules go, we switched me back to a California resident starting in 1998. David DeSalvo, you'll find, is one of the most annoying sticklers for the rules that I have ever met in my life. He drives me crazy every time I say I want to write something off. He tells me I can't, or whatever the case may be. He is just one of those guys, but he's great at what he does. And that's why my mother trusted him for so many years, and I did to this day. He just did my taxes, finished a few days ago. So I come to Las Vegas, and she, of course, could not wait. And I'm speaking for her. No, she went. She was like, well, he's there. I'm going to have to go see him. I'm speaking for her. I'm sure she'll have her own version of the story. But all I can tell you is, like, I would not be a person that would ever tell you there is anything in reality about love at first sight or any of that. I would have said BS. That's just in the movies. I've been writing about this stuff for years. I've seen that movie. That's Hollywood. Well, I can just tell you for sure, from my perspective, the moment I laid eyes on her, it was like a cartoon. I mean, we immediately connected. We had already sort of laid the groundwork for some of the basic stuff as far as starting a relationship later in life. In fact, one of the things that she did to me, which I think is brilliant now that I look back on it, but at the time I wasn't so sure. Early on, she said, we're getting older, and I think, to see if this is really, if we're really compatible, I'd like to do a disclosure statement with you. I said, okay, you mean like corporate non-disclosure agreement? Something like that, where you're going to tell me everything about you that I'm going to like and everything about you that I'm going to hate, or you think I might hate. So we exchanged that list. And that became the framework of an understanding at an older, mature age as to what you were going to build this relationship on. Now, it turns out that list didn't look that bad to me. Like, the worst thing on her list was the fact that she loses her keys all the time. Well, that still goes on to this day. Now, how did we fix that? We buy an AirTag. Good, easy solution with technology. But this is what led up to this moment of, I guess, sort of all that expectation. Within a matter of days, from at that moment, Henry was there at the same time. We had a meal together, and he was like, man, what is going on with you guys? And, it really was love at first sight, if you can say cliche, I know, but it was very intense. And we immediately started living together. And this led to a couple of things, but it led to an RV trip, because she wrote a book. It's called The 30-Day Heartbreak Cure. And she's a relationship expert therapist. So, you got to listen to what she has to say about relationships, or I'm going to hear that anyway. And so she says, I have a rule that people, need to, like, be with I'm going to butcher this, I know, because I didn't read the book. I just paraphrased it. But essentially, you have to spend time together in close quarters, uninterrupted, undisputed time. I said the RV is how you can do this. I mean, you can't get any closer quarters in RV. And I mentioned the word RV and camping, and she says, oh, yeah, I don't do camping, So I sent her a picture of that RV you guys just saw, the big brown RV, and she goes, oh, maybe I could hang with that. Her idea, of roughing it, is room service, I think is what you said, something like that. So long story short, we went on an RV trip that was supposed to last just a few weeks. We were out 3 months. Now, we went and met her mother. I wanted to meet her mom. This relationship's getting pretty tight here pretty quick. Now, did you meet my mom before we left or after? I'm not sure. Can't do that, right? Anyway, we were starting to want to introduce our parents and family to each other. So we said, I got to go back to Tennessee anyway, because we're trying to save this deal. She was there. Right at that photo you saw of the island, she was there on that island with me, with my dog, Yippee, Y-I-P-P-I. And we were on that island together, and she saw all that. But we spent time traveling for 3.5 months together. She met Greg Orman. I met Greg Orman in Kansas City in a bar to try to settle this deal before we went into bankruptcy court.
Why don't you've gotten ahead of your pictures again. Why don't you roll through some of these?
Okay, we're talking about that, aren't we? The meeting I'm talking about was January of 10, the first big get-together. We'd been communicating before that, but that was the big one. That's my dog, Yippee, and her dog, and that was one of the first pictures that was taken of us together, literally like within a day of us being together. And so there's Henry, by the way, on the right. But like this, within a matter of a few weeks, we've already had the discussion that we're engaged and we're planning to live together, and game over. I had given her a little engagement thing. It was something my sister had given me. It was a jade green fish, and I gave her that, and then eventually a ring to follow. Shortly after that, she met my mother. Now, my mother was playing Vegas regularly. She, would visit there regularly as well, but she's playing there a lot. And so she says, well, my mother's very protective of me, and we were very tight. We've been through a lot together. I've always protected my mother and my sister, and I'm fairly well known for that. But it was just due to how close we were and how many difficult things we had been through. My mother, as you might or might not know, had been through a very tumultuous divorce very early in her life with my father, Eddie Fisher. This led to a horrible divorce with her second husband, Harry Carl, that resulted in her losing a lot of money. But I was older then, and I started to understand that I needed to be by her side and protect her. So she felt the same way about me. So when she sees me disappear for like all this time, and to me then saying, like, in this shorter period of time, that's it, we're engaged, we're gonna be together. My mother was like, whoa, 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 hold everything here. We don't have a good history in this family. I got to check this out for myself. So there's the picture of my mother and her together. And, it was funny, after this meeting, my mother was, I was like, so what do you think? Because I knew she was going to give her the third degree, so to speak. She says, she's a good girl. So I knew I'd made a good choice. Now, this is where Kat lived. This cat, Catherine. If I say Kat, it's because that's everybody calls Catherine Kat. There's my RV parked out in front of Catherine's house. She owned this house. She'll tell you her own story about how that came to be. But you'll notice to the right of the frame, there's a white truck. Can you see that okay? See the white truck in the picture up there? I want everybody to see that. It's really important. There's a F-450 pickup truck, the same one you saw that was used to move the museum, the same that to and from Vegas, is now sitting in her driveway. There's a reason for that, because the move had begun. Now, this photo is date stamped April 20th, 2010. That truck never got used except for moving. That's what it was for. So it just so happens I happen to have found this picture. It just so happens in the background. Because I was asked early on by the Franchise Tax Board. They have a thing. It's very difficult to prove something that you say, at least it is to them, because they're essentially have called into question anything and everything I've ever said since day one. There's absolutely no time where they've said, oh, he's telling the truth. It's always presumed that I'm lying. That's how I feel, based on every paper I've ever read. Well, these are really nice moments when you find a photo like this, because there's a date where I'm moving into Kat's house, which presumably didn't happen, and all of that. So it backs up some of the things that I have said. Now, there are in the world of what Lydia was talking about earlier, where you're having to make this case. Where do I live? What is home to me? Well, for me, I've grown up in a world where we've had 5 homes at one time. Plus, we travel 48 weeks a year. Home is where I am staying at that moment. It's just not it's used in a different vernacular than it is being used by them. They use the term home the way you would use it in a movie, or Leave It to Beaver or Father Knows Best, where you live in a little neighborhood and everybody has one house that they go to and they have a regular job and all that. Now, that is not, nor has it ever been, my world. I've spent my life traveling. And if I'm at some other place in the world and we say, I'll see you at home, it might mean the Savoy Hotel. I worked in documentary films for decades of my life. All over the world I've traveled. Home might be, Afghanistan or Turkey or wherever I happen to be working. I'll see you at home. Now, some other person might say, home is your actual house that you reside in. Well, I have had that in my life. And even when these things are going on here, I actually have, even at that exact moment, 4 homes that are properties that I own a piece of. So if you say, what's your home? for me, it's wherever I am at that moment. If you're asking me the legal definition of it, I really don't know. I'm not a lawyer, but obviously that's one of the things that's been challenged here is what is that definition? Well, for me, it's where my heart is. It's where I've decided to live with my future wife, who I live with at that address to this day. Now, there it is with the moving to Vegas. Now, the first thing that happens is we realize that my lifestyle is big. And this was overwhelming to her, and I have a lot of stuff. Now, this had a big basement and 3-car garage and all that. We even parked the RV and made full hookups for the RV on the right side of that house. But even that is not going to cut it. Also, it really isn't going to even cut it for her because we're getting written up every other day because she has too many pets. So these homeowners associations are driving us absolutely crazy. We literally are getting 3 and 4 and 5 stickers deep of complaints about too many pets, RV in the driveway, truck in the driveway, trailer in the driveway. So we right away realize we have got to get a proper property here, and it cannot be a homeowners association. So we immediately get together. Now, this happened at the Oasis RV Park in Las Vegas in a jacuzzi where we had a discussion about what it is we need to have. What are we going to buy together and how is this going to work? Now, the first thing I did is I talked about all the negative things about Las Vegas, like Lake Mead's running dry. So, but me being an engineer background person, I said, let's buy a property with a well and backup power and this and that. So as much as I was scaring her a little bit about the potential causes and effects of living in Las Vegas, it's a workaround. I'm like, these are engineering problems. So, but we determined after that.
Mr. Fisher?
Yeah.
I'm sorry to interrupt. And I understand that you're the appellant, and I want to make sure that you're heard.
I get my chance.
But we do have limited time. There are 5 witnesses over the next 2 days, and I want to make sure that we leave ample time for you and for everyone else to have their turn. And so just please keep in mind that we've used up the opening presentation, 45 minutes, and we're just about a half hour into the witness testimony time. So I want to make sure that we stay focused and get moving.
I appreciate that,
forward.
Judge Long.
Thank you.
He is our primary witness. The other witnesses will not be taking anywhere near as long as Mr.
Right.
Fisher's testimony.
But also, these are points that are, if in fact what Lydia is saying is true, that is that the intent of the person is relevant, then that is why I'm taking the moment to explain when these decisions were made and why and how and what happened. Now, I'm going to move pretty quick through this. We're way into this.
Sure. No, I understand. I just want to make sure that
But
everyone that you brought gets the time that you want them to have.
I think even if I were to go on for another half hour, I think we'd still have plenty of time for everybody else, because I don't think anybody. I'm covering sort of this broad overview, and I'm hoping that she will fill in her version of what happened, and I've already covered part of her version, or I'm in the middle of it. But the other ones will fill in their little blanks, and hopefully it just amplifies. What I'm obligated to do is to justify and to sort of reinforce my words, because in the past my declarations have actually been met with these words. Little or no weight can be given to these words. That's a quote. So if you say to me after I talk to you, little or no weight can be given to your words, what are you saying to me? I don't appreciate it. Let's put it that way. So I've never been happy about the way all of our witnesses were treated in regard to their declarations. So we are taking the time to discuss things that deal with that, in effect. And so I'll amplify with my other witnesses things that were said by me, and then I'll let them amplify it to prove it even further. Because there are not going to be any controversial live testimony that exists. It's me and my friends and people.
Okay.
But I appreciate you. I'll move it. I'm pretty good at telling stories fast. I'm known for it.
Fair enough. All right, continue.
So a decision was made that we needed to find a piece of property that would suit us. It could store my memorabilia. She has her own memorabilia. She was in Knight Rider, the show. You remember the show with the a car. So she has a kit car. So all of a sudden we have more memorabilia because she has her own memorabilia. She collects autographs and other memorabilia. So you're putting collections together all of a sudden. I'm not trying to move everything I own, just so you guys know as well. I didn't move everything I owned from the ranch over to this house. I just moved certain things that I wanted around me or I wanted to protect, such as firearms, things like that. There were cameras, some things. I did not move everything I owned into her house over time. So it became quick that this house was not going to do for us. So we went out looking for new houses. Now, if you look at the date of all this, this is a rough time for sales of houses in Las Vegas. There were a lot of short sales. We actually had 4 different houses in escrow. None of them went through. And these were offers written at par. Some of them were short sales where the bank lost possession and the owners took back over. But a variety of reasons, everything we wanted fell apart. In the meantime, her house sells because we knew we were going for her to put up her part, we were going to be partners on this. 3-way partnership. My mother, Kat, and I were going to partner and buy a property big enough that could be a family compound and handle all of our material needs for being in Vegas. So we looked and everything fell apart. One day, I get this phone call from her. She's out looking for houses. And I happened to get on my computer at that moment and do a search. And I said, have you been to this house, one particular house? That was the trip to Kat's mom. We don't need to, I'm going to skip over this just for the sake of time, but I skipped over these slides, but these are just our travels together. When I said we went out for 3 months, these were what went on. I took her up to my ranch in Montana that I owned with my father-in-law. And by the way, if there was ever another resident for me, that would be it. I mean, I love that place more than anywhere else. So I spent a lot of time in Montana. But I wanted to move up to, that's Kat and her. My father died. I had to move him. Now, that happened in 2010. 2010 was a busy year. In fact, if you really analyze what the dates I've shown you from 2008 forward, these dates are, jamming up on us here. There's the reorganization. We talked about that. Where I'm skipping up to, that's just the family getting together. More road trips. We did several road trips together. It's something that we really love to do to each other. There's the auction. Now, what I was skipping up to, and I would just come back to it, when I called her that day, I said, have you seen this house? And she says, no. I said, go over there right now. They just lowered the price. She goes over to this house, which is the home we live in now, and she says, oh, my God, this is my dream house. Now, she doesn't talk like that, so I was like, show me a couple pictures. She did, put an offer in at par, no conditions that day, closed in 30 days. So we finally found the house. Now, just dropping backwards, while all this is going on, we're looking for houses and all that, I've obviously got to prepare for this big auction that we're having at the Paley Center. And so these are pictures of my mother and I. Now, these photographs are taken at the ranch on the soundstage area with her preparing costumes for photography that are going to be used in the main auction. Now, every single costume has to be handled a certain way. By this point, we've learned how to handle textiles from the Victoria and Albert Museum in England. They trained us on how to handle textiles so that our textiles would be around for hundreds of years. You may not know this, but I didn't know it, but they have coronation outfits that are 400 and 500 years old. Mint condition clothing that you would think, how could that be 400 years old? So I was like, how do you do that? I want to make sure that these other costumes are around in 400 to 500 years. They said, come on over. And I spent 2 weeks in England with another person and myself, and they taught us how to do it. So there is the date that Kat's home sells. It was kind of inconvenient in certain respects because we thought by then we would have already had another house that we could move into. So we were in a bad way at that moment. We had to go rent a house because and storage units because we were, the timing was wrong. I mean, we thought we had timed it perfectly, but these short sales kept falling apart. So we rented that house there. I said I rent 10922 Dornoch Castle. So I rented that house, prepaid it for a year. Now, for the next 6 months, we kept going around in a circle. But finally, there's Carrie. That's Kat and Yippee over. Now, that's in the house. Now, the reason why that's relevant for you guys is that's May of 11. We're still in Kat's house there. Now, there's the house that we rented. And not big enough, even worse, her house was twice that size. So we had 2 storage units in Southern Highlands during this time. Now you get into the auctions. You want to get into detail on that?
Yeah, we have obviously to talk about the auction, but let me just quickly stop you there because that rental is an interesting point. Why would you bother to rent a house in Las Vegas and put cat stuff in storage when you could have gone to Creston?
Hey, that's a good point. This is why she's the attorney, you see. What happened is we had made a deal that neither one of us wanted to be at the ranch anymore. I told you about the time in the Oasis Spa. We had decided we wanted to live in Vegas. We wanted to find a house that we could do together. So and she had no intentions of ever living at the ranch. That's not to say that we don't care about the ranch. That's not to say that there aren't important things at the ranch. It's just to say that that's not the future. I built that life with Christy, who had passed away. We are now building a life together. I don't think there's anybody that could not understand what I'm saying. So we were looking for that new property to build our life together. We couldn't find it instantaneously, and we wanted to be in Vegas. Now, I'm spending a lot of time during that time frame in California, but when I'm not doing the Paley Center, I'm coming back to Vegas, and that's why we wanted that house. She wanted that Vegas house no matter what. She wanted her Vegas presence. We both love Vegas. I could show you a picture of myself in Vegas, throughout my entire life. We've always felt a certain way about Las Vegas. Not to say that I don't love California. California is an amazing state. It's just not where our life was going to be any further. The auction that goes on in June of 11 at the Paley Center was the cream of the crop of my mother's collection. This is the best items that were in the collection. There was some concern that we were not raising enough money to pay off the debt, so we had to overload the auction with items to make sure we were going to raise enough money. Nobody dreamed it would raise $20 million. So that was stunning, that these items went for this enormous amount of money. My mother was afraid the night before that we weren't going to even pay off the debt and she'd have absolutely nothing. And I said, I did not feel that way. I knew this would be successful, and the people turned out, and the auction was hugely successful. There's a picture of the auction catalog. There's a picture of my mother talking at the auction, which was heartbreaking to watch, knowing that she had spent 50 years amassing this collection just to see it finally having to be dispersed. And a lot of the collection went to South Korea and Saudi Arabia and places that were my worst nightmare. Not that there's anything wrong with South Korea or those places, but these is part of the American fabric of this country. This is the Hollywood Motion Picture Museum. Movies, the greatest movies made in this country. That collection needed to stay here and be displayed in this country, not in South Korea. Other than that, I have no feelings about it.
Let's take a step back for a second, especially as we're about to hit these key items. We've talked at some length about the separation of the collection, of the different entities that owned each piece. Can you again describe for the panel, in the run-up to the auction, being the sort of the closure of Belle Isle in 2008 through the auctions in 2011, where were the various pieces of memorabilia owned by these various entities?
I got to back up a hair further. When we were at the hotel, we started to database the entire collection. First time. The collection prior to that had been handwritten, effectively typed out lists of inventories. When my mother would contribute some costumes to the nonprofit, there would be a schedule attached to the tax return that would get copied and added to the inventory of the museum. It was pretty primitive accounting of who had what. But when we went to the hotel, because we were moving everything, it was a grand opportunity to really update this. So there was a company called FileMaker that makes a regional database program that allowed me to enter all the information about every costume, not only who might have owned it, where it was, who wore it, what movie was used, and the condition of it. All these particulars could be brought into play. a couple of years into the hotel operation, that program was updated to FileMaker Pro, where it allowed you to put an image with the item. So now we all of a sudden had the picture of the artifact plus the descriptions and the ownership. Now, during the hotel days is when I got my mother to really get into who owned what, when, where, because only she knew at that point. I didn't know. Nobody knew. The accountants knew what was attached to the tax returns. Beyond that, you had to ask her, what entity owns what. So we got her to sit and go through these databases over time with us and to update them. And that is the beginning of sort of the really understanding who owned what and where it was. Because there were still things at DR Studios in there those days. There certainly was massed amount of stuff at the museum itself, and there was still stuff at her home, the condo. So the next thing that happens is we start to get to, now that program is in play and it gets updated over the years, and so it's being used in Tennessee and everywhere else. So if something gets moved to Tennessee, you would go into the database and you would say this item here has been moved to Tennessee, and we would have updated it. Then when it was moved out of Tennessee, say it came back to Las Vegas, it would have sent back to Debbie's house in Vegas. So a lot of this stuff was tracked pretty carefully on this database throughout these years. In addition to that, the ownership of who owned what was also very well established there. And in fact, that is the ownership records that were used for tax purposes after the auctions throughout the 3-4 sales. So the database became the foundation for tax accounting of who owned what, when, where. That's sufficient?
Again, let me just clarify a little bit further for the panel.
Sure.
We have discussed this separation of the memorabilia, that Creston housed predominantly the museum memorabilia, because you've referred, and I think it's confusing to the FDB, you've referred to the collection as the amorphous entire collection, and I think we need to be really careful here that, but for some lesser pieces, Creston housed the museum memorabilia.
Well, let me explain it. I had things that I kept in Creston. There was a camera crane, for example, that was too big for me to drag anywhere else. Once it came from Las Vegas to Tennessee, instead of it going back to Vegas where I had no place for a camera crane that would barely fit in this room, it went back to Creston. So there are examples of things that were moved and maintained. Even though I owned that camera crane, it was stored at the ranch. But she brings up a great point. Literally 80%, quantitatively speaking, of the collection was stored in Creston. Because, as I told you, 2,000 costumes were owned by the museum, by the nonprofit. So it had a bulk of the space. It occupied the bulk of the space. But that's not to say that we didn't bring things there. I mean, a great example. They actually brought up the example of the Antique Roadshow. The Antique Roadshow was a TV show. They called me up and they said, "We'd love to do a show on you." This is around the time when we're wanting to promote the museum. And we're like, "Shoot, that's a great show. We'd love to do it. What do you want?" And they said, "We want this, this, and this." And it included the subway dress and the ruby slippers. Well, they had to be moved from Vegas to Creston so we could film them at the location where they were coming, where they wanted to film 5 or 6 other things. So in the movie business, this is what you do. You have what's called set dressing or prop dressing or costume dressing. These things are brought to place so you can pull off the show that is desired. In this case, the Antique Roadshow wants to do a show, and they want flashy items. Well, I had to get my mother to approve that. You couldn't move that subway dress without my mother approving it. You couldn't touch it. I mean, she was very protective. Given the history of it being stolen, given what she knew the value would, be, she never dreamed it would be $5 million. She dreamed it would be $2 million at best. So needless to say, these items are moved around as need be. I took the subway dress to Japan one time. There was a television show there that wanted it, a similar kind of an Antique Roadshow. They kept calling and offered me money, and I kept telling my mother, and she's like, no, we're not going to drag that costume all the way to Japan and put that at risk. And the number kept going up higher and higher and higher. And finally it hit like $100,000 or some number like that. And she said, "I guess you're going to Japan." So I picked up the costume. Actually, Donald Light, Light, was her assistant at that time. And he drove the costume to wherever I was. And then I flew to Japan with that costume and did the show. This is how it's done. We did that 30 times. There were 20 different shows, magazines. We're not even, I mean, they've uncovered one or two. I could tell you 20 more where we move stuff around. So this notion that just because the subway dress is sitting at the ranch during the Antique Roadshow somehow indicates where it was living is not the case. What you'll understand is my mother knew the Monroe pieces by this point were the most valuable parts of the collection. They were the most famous. They were the most potentially valuable. We didn't know exactly how much. So she had kept very close care of those. She always kept the ruby slippers with her. Those always had to be moved. She always kept the Maltese falcon with her. So that always had to be moved. So anytime somebody needed or wanted some of these things, they had to be brought from Las Vegas to LA. Not a big problem. You put them in a car and you roll. This has been misunderstood by them because their only context is searching the internet for information, because anything we say could not possibly have credibility. So the end of the story on the auction is all of these items, and I'll show you some of them. There's the gingham dress of Judy Garland. That I don't know the exact amounts at this point. I do know that, once again, my mother had determined years ago where these costumes would reside. Now, that Cleopatra costume there on the right was actually given to the museum by Elizabeth Taylor, who was my mother's very close friend. Now, on the left, you'll see a Marilyn Monroe. There's no business like show business. That was stored in Las Vegas. Those are examples of that. The Rudolph Valentino suit of life, my mother, we bought that later on in our collecting days, and that was all silver bullion. She decided that was a super important piece, given it was from 1925 and belonged to Rudolph Valentino. That never left her side. The Marlon Brando Desiree costume traveled around. I could show you, slide after slide. Actually, they have more slides than I do even. But the catalog is actually online, the whole catalog. It's a public domain information. So you could see it. There were a lot of amazing pieces, of which it was up to my mother, essentially, to determine what was important to her and where it would reside. Now, when we had the hotel, it was great because everything was in Vegas.
Todd, why don't you jump that Montana picture and go to the pictures for the second auction?
Right.
And again, focusing in on what this is.
Right. So if you notice in the foreground, there is plastic bins. There's also blue boxes. Now, those are acid-free cardboard boxes. Those are very expensive costumes in there that would have been archivally wrapped and protected. Now, if you look at those bins, for example, on the floor, I'm looking. Those are examples of a full-size costume in a plastic bin. Now, in our little van, we had a little van at this time. You could literally, if you look in the background, you see the purple gondola, I call it. In the van would hold 4 gondolas and about 40 boxes. You could move a lot of stuff around the van. But when it got past the van, you saw that red trailer earlier in the picture with the white pickup truck. That trailer could hold 8 gondolas and probably 50 of these bins. So you could move a huge amount of the collection around with that red trailer or the van and the red trailer. So everything was brought quickly to this location where it was organized for the auction. So things were still at DR Studios. Things were in Tennessee. Things were in Vegas. Everything had to be brought here as a central location. We talked to the auctioneer, and they were like, we don't have the facilities to even do this. We need a huge space where we can lay all this out and organize it. We have to authenticate. We have to get everything prepared for the auction before it even gets shipped down to Beverly Hills for the auction. We got to go through all this stuff and photograph it. And so they ended up using our space to do that. And they requested that everything be moved to the ranch in Creston, the farm, whatever you want to call it. And literally things from all around began to culminate into, this was for both auctions, by the way. Everything was really brought in for the first auction. 500 items were selected. You understand that these auctions in those days particularly didn't want to have 1,000 lots. So they would say, we want 500 of the best items. So everything was brought to the farm. Many things were rejected. And they were left there until the second auction. But they still ended up at the Paley Center because everything went on display at the Paley Center. Even after the first auction was over, we immediately went in and redecorated the entire Paley Center into another museum. And I'll show you, there's a picture of the Paley Center decorated for the second museum. Now you'll notice right here, it's an item that's been brought up by the Franchise Tax Board. on the right is the bus stop dress. Now, this costume was one of my mother's favorites. It's an amazing little scene where Marilyn Monroe sings Old Black Magic, and it's just campy Marilyn Monroe stuff. So that was always with her. The one up in the front there, see the blue one in the front? That is Let's Make Love. All of these costumes had to be brought in from my mother's home. They were set up in Creston, photographed in Creston, immediately brought to the Paley Center for display, and subsequently this auction, I believe, was December? Yes. Was in December of that same year. So within a 12-month period, everything that had been moved was certainly liquidated at one time or another, but not everything could go in that first sale. There's my camera collection that was sold in the second auction. This brings up a really good point. That camera in the middle there, the white one with says Panavision, I don't know if you can read that or not. That camera is the camera that shot Star Wars. And it, by some fluke that camera even was saved, because Panavision destroyed all those cameras. But a friend of mine found that camera and came to me and partnered up with me, and effectively I brokered the sale of that camera. So there was an issue here, again, about sourcing, if that's a word that we can use. This guy was from Ohio. The camera was brought to me to put on display for the second auction, to sell in the second auction. When it sold, I received a percentage of the proceeds. It was a sliding scale depending on how much was received. But, not recognized. I never owned the camera. I just merely received a commission for it.
Todd, can you go back to the prior picture for a second? One thing I want to focus in on is something you keep mentioning, which is the notion of these costumes being maintained at Debbie's house.
Yep.
Can you talk about why it made sense to store these costumes at Debbie's condo in Las Vegas?
Well, the first thing has to do with, in her mind, where can I control and how can I control this? How can I make sure that this doesn't get stolen again? I glossed over the fact that during the Greenway House days, my mother had 450 costumes stolen from the collection at that time. How do I know that? Because I recovered them years later in Boston at a museum that was displaying them. I got the courts to step in. I froze the collection and recovered every last costume. And the guy that had stolen them was a guy that had worked for her. So the paranoia that she had was very real, that this collection people were wanting to steal this stuff. So she started to want to do that. Now, the house that she had, the condo that my mother lived in, she was in a country club towers in Las Vegas, on the Las Vegas Country Club. In order to get to the building, you have to go through a guard gate. Then you have to drive approximately a half a mile to where you drive up, and you now are met with a doorman, and you have to get past him. Why are you here? What's going on? Then you have to go inside and obtain further clearance to get on the elevator. So needless to say, she loved that about the building. A lot of celebrities lived in this building because it was a high security building. She felt nobody stayed in that apartment, or very close friends did. I won't say nobody, because she did have people. I stayed there during different conventions and things like that. Not nobody. But she had some of her very favorite stuff there. And I don't mean just costumes. I mean some of her best antiques, some of her best personal possessions. She chose to keep those in her Vegas house. It was her private domain. Everything else in her life had been lost. You think about it. It's been lost to divorces, liquidated. When she got divorced from Harry Carl back in the 70s, they liquidated all of her collections. They tried to liquidate the museum, but she gave everything else up to stop that from happening. She had to give up all her other art objects in exchange for preserving this collection, because they wanted to liquidate this too. It was community property at the time. This is before, I'm going back in 1974. So anyway, that's what you wanted me to cover?
It is. Thank you, Todd.
Okay.
Sorry, before we continue, we do need to take a break at this time. So we'll take a 10-minute break. If everyone could come back at 3:10.
Thank you.
And then we'll also be taking a subsequent break at 4 o'clock. All right. We're all back. And Ms. Alonso is ready? Yes. All right. Mr. Fisher, ready, set, go.
Todd, if you could continue working through these slides, there's a couple ahead of this that I'd like to get to just clean up a couple of points.
Back or
Ahead. Okay, so here, yes, let's just quickly on this. That was a picture of the new purchase, correct?
So this house was purchased, it closed January of 12. We, as I said, had struggled to find something like this. Now, the unique thing about this property,
Todd, hang on one second. Why don't you
gotta
go
go
there?
there.
You go, thank you.
well, there, and then there's us in front of us. So that's January 16th. That's when we took possession of the house. This is, that's showing the house. It's a pretty good sized house. It's just under 7,000 square feet, but this has big outbuildings, and it's sitting on an acre and a quarter of land. It has its own well. It has its own septic systems. So very quickly, the first thing we did is we installed solar backup power systems, automatic transfer switches, making the house more to protect her as well. If she's home alone, I want the house to be able to maintain itself, although we've never really had any major outages in Nevada.
And Todd, can you move forward to slides 101 to 104? They should be the next set coming up. And can you discuss this?
Well, so we talked about this earlier. That's the country club towers that belonged to my mom. She was on the 12th floor of that building. The one thing that happened when we bought this house is we all put up the money for this. The house was vested title Catherine Hickland, Todd Fisher, and Debbie Reynolds. And we tried to get my mother to move into the house, and then she gave us the speech about how two things start to smell after 3 days: fish and guests. And she looked at herself like she was going to be a guest in this house. I'm like, you don't understand. We dig you no matter what. Well, anyway, it prompted us to build her own house. Really, it's a sitting room and a bedroom. It's about 1,200 square feet. There's the house finished. And she began to move everything from the condo all of a sudden into this house. Now, you got to remember, this is 2012. We're past the second auction. There are no more Marilyn Monroe costumes. However, all of her best stuff to this day is sitting in that house exactly the way she left it. When she decorated this house, we left it. If you walk into her house to this day and you pull open her drawer, you'll find her eyebrow pencil exactly where she left it. You'll see the paintings that she hung on the wall exactly where she hung them. It's sort of a tribute to her, but that was built for her. And you can notice on the upper right corner, there are solar panels. That house was completely solar powered as well.
And Todd, can we focus on this for a second? Because another point that the Franchise Tax Board has raised is the Bright Lights documentary.
Bright lights.
And the notion that somehow Debbie did not, in fact, return home to Las Vegas when she was not on the road, but during, again, focusing on these years in issue, that Debbie was going to Los Angeles with Carrie. Can you explain why that's incorrect?
Right. So my mother and sister had a very famous, tumultuous relationship. In fact, the movie is written about it. And the Meryl Streep plays my sister, and Shirley MacLaine plays my mother. And it's called Postcards from the Edge. Now, in this movie, it's about mother-daughter not getting along. Well, the reality is, for 10 straight years, my mother and sister did not get along. I was the intermediary. And it was like out of a movie where my mother would say, "Would you tell her that I would like to get together for Christmas?" And I turn over and I say, "Carrie, Mom would like to get together on Christmas." She said, "You tell her that I said okay." She says okay. I mean, it was literally, I was this sort of middle person that had to translate. Well, later on, after the Hollywood and Highland debacle, my sister really got on board with the museum at that time. And she also was maturing a little bit in her own self because she was becoming a fairly famous writer. So the competition was slowing between them. And this is around the time when she acquired this house in Beverly Hills that was originally part of Carrie's property. Carrie lived at 1700 Coldwater Canyon. This was Edith Head's old estate. It's 5 acres in Beverly Hills. This Edith Head was a famous costume designer. Elizabeth Taylor lived in this house back in the 30s and 40s, not 30s, but 40s. And this house was sort of famous in its own right. Carrie really bought this house and was like, "This is so cool. I've got Edith Head's house." Now, many years ago, back in the 70s, they had sold off the 2 front parcels. and they had been separated for decades. So when this property, one of the properties came up for sale, it would bring the old guest house back into the property. So my mother acquired that house on Coldwater. Now, in her mind, Carrie was having a child. And she was thinking, wouldn't it be nice if I could have this great relationship with my daughter and help raise my grandchild? You know, and if you're writing the script, this would be a great thing. But the reality is, nobody predicted that Carrie's baby father would turn around and say he's gay. And all of a sudden, no, their house is split, and you're raising the child. He's raising the child somewhere else, and I mean, just life doesn't work out the way you planned. So it was a dream of hers to really have that relationship with Carrie and live in that house. Now, when we made the documentary Bright Lights, things were changing. My mother was not on the road as much. My mother spent approximately 48 weeks a year, for real, on the road.
Todd, can you just confirm when Bright Lights was actually filmed?
So it was, that's a good question. I don't know the exact date, but I'm going to say it would have been, let's see.
Well, it was out in 2016. Does that
Yeah,
help?
well, it wasn't even finished. So in 16, you know, my mother and sister pass away in December, but the documentary wasn't really done yet entirely. So we scrambled to get it finished to get that released. This is an HBO documentary that we did on the family. But in this documentary, Carrie and my mother are really having this cool relationship, and it's really neat that they're becoming friends again. Now, this had happened really for several years even prior to that. I would say maybe 2 years prior to Bright Lights. Let's just say 14 would be probably a good date. My mother is starting to spend more time home. So what's home for Debbie? Well, she's a Nevada resident, right? So is home the tower that I showed you? Or is home the new house in Coldwater Canyon? Well, whatever the accountant's calculations were is what Debbie's home was. I honestly don't know what her situation was, but I know she maintained her Nevada residency to the end. But she was spending a lot more time with Carrie. They were starting to become close friends again, which I thought was fantastic. She never got to be that close with her granddaughter because of this split between Carrie and the father. But it was nice to see them become friends again.
I want to sort of go back to a couple of points that got kind of glossed over, and then sort of hopefully put an end to this. The first is, one of the issues is the movement of memorabilia, and there's been some challenges to how you could possibly have done that on your own, with friends, with employees of DR Studios. Can you explain why that came to fruition, both logistically but also financially?
Well, we're the kind of people that like to do things ourselves. I mean, I build and design big things. You saw some of the things that I build and design. You know, my grandfather raised us all a certain way. My grandfather worked for the Southern Pacific Railroad. He was an old Texas man, very practical, sort of horse sense guy. He drilled into all of our minds when we were young, there's no such word as can't in your vocabulary. And he did that to my mother. He did it to me. So we like doing things ourselves. Sometimes you have to design something yourself to get what you want. Now, when it comes to moving things, my mother insisted that certain things be moved by us personally or people that we trusted. In vehicles, that red trailer was custom built just to move Hollywood memorabilia, our collection. Literally, the shelves that were built in there were made to move the collection, pieces of the collection. So we had vehicles that were made to move the collection. We never hired, ever, anybody to move the collection. We moved the collection with that F-450 pickup truck. And we had two different vans over the years, but we had a regular van, and then later we had a Sprinter van. So we always moved the collection ourselves. It had to do with control. It had to do also with handling things. If you leave things, you can't leave things in the sun. These things are temperature sensitive. They dirt, other things are a major factor. You can't leave it overnight. Let's say you're traveling to Tennessee. You know, we had that red trailer built so that it was sealed. You could leave that collection and travel, but we drove straight through with those trailers. We had two drivers, and they'd go all the way through. So that's why the collection was handled by us. Over the years, my mother, way earlier on, used North American van lines and storage to move things and to pay for storage, and she learned real quick how expensive that got. And as you can imagine, when you have a collection this big, this thing will eat you alive. And it did. In the end, where we were, when we were sitting at that bankruptcy and we were sitting in that Santa Barbara bankruptcy court, we had been eaten alive by the costs to maintain this collection, by the deals that had failed, by the people that had failed, by the people that had stolen. That took its toll on all of us.
Okay, Todd, I'm going to ask you to now very quickly, because I know it's important to you, move through the remainder of these slides and just sort of explain the importance.
Well, there's Kat with her pet goose in Vegas. Obviously, Kat had pets in both locations. Some were my old pets that lived on the farm. There are still pets to this day, by the way, that still live on the property, even though it was sold 3 years ago. There are still some of our pets living there, generations of peacocks and other animals that still live there.
Todd, can you explain why that is before we get the wrong impression there?
Sure.
Because of who purchased the farm?
So the farm, after being tried to be sold for years, we were in escrow numerous times, fell in and out of escrow. It was in escrow one time for like 6 months, and the guy kept paying to keep it in escrow. The deals, none of them ever went through. Finally, 3 years ago, in like December, so almost 3 years ago, In Defense of Animals, it's a nonprofit organization, came along and went, wow, this is perfect for us to build an animal rescue operation. And by the way, we would like to keep any and all animals that you would like to live here, especially the ones you're willing to continue to pay for. So I have a miniature donkey that still lives there that I pay for. The peacocks and some of the other birds have been there for generations. The cattle, they took on all the cattle operation that was there since the Christie days we were talking about. So that's what happened when we sold that farm. Now, you could see in these pictures here, these are just various pets. If you look at the picture on the right, that was my bird. He would travel with me all over. He was in my RV. He would, wherever I went, he went. Kat had a similar menagerie of pets that traveled with her. Now, the lady, if I have this picture, my mother was working on a movie called Behind the Candelabra. It's the life story of Liberace. She plays Liberace's mother. So she's now living in Vegas with us working on this movie. Somebody sends me this picture, and it came on my phone, and I said, why is somebody sending me this random image of this old woman? Because that is not my mother. The makeup was so good that it blew my mind. I didn't even know my own mom. There's the ranch up in Montana in October. There's Kat and I getting married on December 22nd and 12 at my sister's house. And there's Henry Catrona, who you will see tomorrow, who's the Kat's original pastor, the guy I started the church with. He was officiated the wedding, and Carrie is my best man on the far side, your left. That's more wedding pictures. That's Carrie, my mother, myself at the wedding. May of 14, there's a third auction that goes on. This is sort of a cleanup auction. We had stuff that we kept uncovering in DR Studios all over the place. So this auction was actually held at DR Studios. That's Studio D at DR Studios. So again, more pieces were drug out for some of them from the ranch, some of them from Vegas, some of them from Tennessee had been returning. So all of this stuff is what I'll call the cleanup auction. That's why it was called the finale. We decided that's it. We've had enough of this. And so that didn't raise as much money, but that was that auction. There we are at the meet and greet, what they call a step and greet. There's one of Kat's pets, Nugget, her rooster, that traveled all over the country with her, literally. I know that's weird, but there it is. There's the Telluride Film Festival. And so there's September of 16. We were looking for a date. There's when the documentary was out. So September of 16, the documentary is does that sound right to you? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Is being released into the Telluride Film Festival. And there's Carrie up on stage with me in the corner. But by December of 16th, we're at Forest Lawn with my mother and sister being laid to rest. That brought on a whole lot of new problems, one of which was DR Studios. Debbie Reynolds Dance Studios had been owned by the Children's Trust. However, there was a partnership that owned 10% of DR Studios that was still owned by my mother. The IRS came in, calculated a tax on it, and asked for $1 million to be paid, and the studio was losing money. There was no way we could do it, so the studio had to be sold. So whatever was left at DR Studios, these containers and other things, was moved to Las Vegas. That's the one of our lots. We have 2.5 acres of additional land next to the house in Las Vegas that is filled with shipping containers and trailers. This was a studio that we had on Tenaya Way, where we were moving some of the filming equipment. This is where some of the memorabilia went. You can see to this day we have many of these items with us in Vegas on display. Actually, it ended up being in our house. If you see that picture with all the bins on the right, upper right corner, you'll notice those are all costumes still in the collection at this point. So by 17, we still have quite a few, probably 100, 150 costumes, of which a lot of them are my mother's. My mother elected many years ago to give me all of her costumes. And I don't know exactly why, but when the big auctions were going on, she said, you should sell all these costumes. You'll never get a better price than now. I said, I'm not going to sell your costumes. And she's like, why? What are you going to do with them? We're not doing the museum. What are you going to do with these costumes? I said, I don't know. Well, I still don't exactly know, except that right now some of these costumes are on loan to other museums. The ruby slippers that were belonging to my mother are actually on loan to the Sphere, where the Oz exhibit is in Las Vegas, as some other pieces that we have. So the parts and pieces of the collection that remain are I've loaned things to the Academy recently. I have lenses on display. Right now, as we speak, I have major pieces on display at the Reagan Library down here in, what's that called, that area? Calabasas? What do you call that? Is that it? No, not Calabasas. Reagan Library. You know what I'm talking about, right? Okay, so they have a museum. They're doing a Western exhibit there. We have stuff from How the West Was Won, Annie Get Your Gun, other things. So there's DR Studios. It got torn down. The property was sold and torn down. There is where the collection is right now, the bulk of it, in my entry hall in Las Vegas. This was a big exhibit we did at the Reagan Library all about Star Wars. We had literally, I have one of the largest private collection of Star Wars memorabilia. Carrie's weapons, Carrie's dresses, her medal bikini. Some of that is stuff I acquired more recently. Other stuff is stuff that Carrie gave me many years ago that I've kept with me. There's me in Japan. Acting. They told me what to say in Japanese, so I just mimicked their words, so then they thought I spoke Japanese. That's a subway dress in Japan, though. They asked for it to be there. I told you about that. End of slideshow. See?
That's it. Thank you, Todd. I will reserve additional time for redirect.
To redo it?
Oh, no.
I'll start again.
I'll do that.
Let me go back to the top.
Thank you. Franchise Tax Board, do you have any questions for Mr. Fisher?
We do, but I just need to get the microphone.
You stole his microphone.
I got it. We're good.
Do you want any of my slides?
We'll be looking at some of the slides.
Okay.
I'm not quite sure.
Did you catch the numbers as we were flying by?
I think the numbers weren't up, but I think
Okay.
I think I have a good idea.
Okay.
Mr. Fisher, good afternoon. My
Mr.
name is-
Hofstall?
Yes.
Hold on one moment.
You blocked.
I'll try to look forward to. So, Mr. Fisher, good afternoon. My name is Ron Hofstall. We met a couple of years ago, I think, on a Teams chat.
Yes, sir.
Gonna have a couple of questions for you. Actually, more than a couple. So
Okay.
we'll go ahead and just get into it. If you need to take a break, I know we're breaking in about a half hour. But
I'm
if you need
fine.
to take a break before then, just go ahead and let me know. Before we get started, as part of this dispute, you had submitted a couple of declarations. Is there anything in reviewing? Is there anything you'd like to change in any of those before we get started?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay, great. Just talk a little bit about the slides a little bit. And probably just the last slide, when we showed the Telluride
The film festival.
event, the festival. Does that refresh your recollection as to when the filming of Bright Lights that may have occurred, since it was premiering?
Well, so
on that date?
so it would have been going on from, let's just minimum of a year before that. It would have had to have begun let's say roughly the same time frame, but in 15.
Fair
Possibly even earlier than that.
Fair enough. And then in slide number 54, I know you just glanced over it kind of quick. When you're talking about that first the Montana trip, there's something there about 3 months. Are you taking the position in that you were in Montana for that 3-month period?
No, 54. Well, it was so it was.
I believe it was slide 54, but I could be.
Probably not, but it's this one right there,
Yeah,
like that.
it has like a little narrative on the bottom.
Well, so let me just say this.
Okay.
At that time, the reason why I've selected some of these slides actually wasn't just the picture. It was because there was a date stamp. Now,
Okay.
as you know, the technology
Sure.
hasn't always been there to date stamp. Oh,
Okay. Sure.
you get him. So I chose pictures that were relevant because of their dates generally to help with the story itself. So what had happened at this time is we had gone on this journey together that lasted 3 months. So if you looked at there was an earlier photo. So there we are meeting her mother in April, that same trip. That's in Florida. And there we are in Vegas in April 20th. So by late April, we're in Florida to meet her mom, and then we're making this big loop to Bell Island, and then we're going back around to Montana to meet my father-in-law, and even in Colorado in June of 10. So we were making, in a way, what you see is happening here is I'm showing her my world. These are the things that I did every year of my life. I mean, I went to Colorado or Montana every single year. Sometimes I would just go skiing, and maybe I go up for a month to Colorado and go jeeping. But one of my favorite people on the planet was Larry Zabel, the guy that owned the ranch, my ex-father-in-law. And he and I became partners on that property. I ended up owning 3/4 of it at one point. And I not only I loved being with him and Kat, and he got along. And, it was a really important thing for me, for her to meet him and get along. So that was part of that first 3-month trip. But we went up subsequently several times.
Fair enough. Thanks for the clarification. Now, as part of the audit, you provided a day calendar.
Yes.
True. Right. And for clarification on any of the dates, would that be the most accurate?
Well, that was built from my assistant's. She had a big calendar on her desk, and she would take some notes that we worked off of. I had my own calendar that was in my computer, the iCal Apple calendar. And then later would have been to cross-reference against photos that had proper date stamps. I mean, like 70% of my photos do have date stamps. So if there was a contradiction, I would lean on the photos probably more than potentially an error in something that was written in a calendar. But in fact, some of these pictures reminded me of things, just as I went back. You guys kind of forced me through memory lane.
And then on the calendar, you indicated dates and that you worked on the museum auction.
Yes.
True. And those dates would be reflective of the time you put on the project. Right?
Yes, I believe, and we were pretty careful about trying to recreate that. And the way we recreated that, because we didn't have pictures for all of that, is we probably worked off of like receipts from the restaurants and stuff in Beverly Hills. Because the whole time I'm at the Paley Center, I'm living in Beverly Hills, which is something I hadn't done since I was a teenager. So, but we were keeping track of that.
Now, I want to move a little bit now to the bankruptcy and the auctions. Now, it's my understanding from your testimony earlier that the actual bankruptcy debt was actually around $4 million. Is that what you testified to?
Yeah. So by the time we were finished, it started at $1 million, and then when you added in years of compounding interest, I think he even wanted more than $4 million, but I believe that we end up settling around that number. That David DeSalvo will be able to probably tell you that.
Right. And then your proceeds from the first auction was a little bit over $22 million. True?
That's correct.
Right. So was all the bankruptcy debt satisfied after the first auction?
Yes, but it had to be. It was because it was cross collateralized. There wasn't enough money in what we had sold in the museum's name. So if you looked at the receipts, the museum itself didn't raise enough money to pay him off in the first round. So the Children's Trust, thus DR Studios, had to step in and pay him off the balance.
And then there was an agreement between the auction house and yourself for you to receive the payment within 30 days, true?
Yes, you're talking about the proceeds?
Yes.
Yes. There was actually several deals. One was an advance as well.
And was the advance part of the first auction or the second auction?
First auction.
First auction. Could we take a one break for 1 second, please? And just for clarification, I know you negotiated it down to $4 million, but the outstanding liability, at least in the bankruptcy, the records, was about $7.2 million, true?
So that's what I was saying in my story when I said that he was asked, I think I used the word 8 million. He had asked, that's what he was trying to collect in the California courts. That's what he was trying to collect in Kansas. That's what forced the bankruptcy, was that amount. He and I cut the deal down to the amount that you're talking about, the 4 million.
Great. And do you have a copy of the exhibits?
Their exhibits, you mean?
I have copies of the exhibits we'll be talking about.
Yes, I travel with them in my mini pocket edition.
Well, I don't know if you had them on your computer or not.
No, I
so
keep them
we're
right
good.
here. Now I do.
Fair enough. And if you can just turn to your exhibit 30, it's kind of towards the end there.
Is it, exhibit 30 or page
Yeah,
30?
it's towards the end of the packet.
No, towards the end. Exhibit L.
Yeah, it might be.
Oh, I got it. It's before all that.
Yeah.
Oh, I got it. Well, no. Can you give me a page number?
It's the last 2 pages of the packet I gave you.
Oh, well, that's that I can handle.
All right.
Okay, I'm with you.
Okay. Now, this is the document that you provided to FTB to reflect when you were paid the proceeds from the second auction, true?
Yeah, this is prepared by David DeSalvo, actually.
Yes. And on this document here, is this just a spreadsheet you provided?
So David DeSalvo loves profit and loss
Okay.
statements. So yes, he prepared this statement. This would have been, of course, prepared for other people as well.
Okay.
There were a lot of people sort of looking over what had happened here, and this was intended to educate all us as to how these things were being handled.
Now, this document reflects that the trust received the $1.4 million from Profiles in History on January 20th.
Yes, I have no reason to dispute that. I would say,
And January 20th was more than 30 days past when the auction took place and the agreement you had with them, true?
yes. I mean, I don't have anything negative to say. They're not the most prompt. Let's just put it that way. I mean,
Okay.
They paid. Nobody was too upset about the missing a deadline.
Okay. The question I have is, if you go down to the bank fees, the first one, it shows a wire fee of $25 on January 3rd, 2012, but I don't see any corresponding money in or money out on that date. Do you have
Yeah.
any explanation of where that January 3rd date came from?
No, I mean, again, this is pretty old, and if money's being wired, there would probably be another spreadsheet, and you could see the ones, see a wire. All of the banking, I think, at this point was being done by First Bank, and we just started working with J.P. Morgan, I think, around the same time. So there are not too many places it would be going. So if there's a lot of different wires, it means it's going to maybe different people.
Now, isn't it true that during the auction, when the proceeds were received from the auction house, that you were the one who actually received that income?
Yes, the checks were, it was either wires or checks. I think actually it was, I can't remember which, to be honest with you. But the money, I filtered the money.
Right. And that money was put into your Citibank account, true?
I never had a Citibank account. It would have had,
Oh,
my mother had a Citibank account, but I didn't. If money came to me, it would have been in J.P. Morgan. I did use J.P. Morgan quite often.
I might have my C's confused, yeah.
It's probably J.P. Morgan.
Chase.
Yeah, Chase,
Chase.
J.P. Morgan Chase, yes.
Okay.
So anything you see that's J.P. Morgan Chase would probably be me
Okay.
directing.
Okay. So how did the money get from your Chase account into this first bank account?
I would have had to have sent a wire, or I wouldn't have written a check. I probably would have wired it.
Right.
Dennis King, who was managing my mother at the time, was very involved in making sure the distributions were being handled certain. So he would request to me, he would say, hey, this is how, because he also was the guy that was handling the trusts. In fact, to this day, he's still one of the, what do you call it, the executive trustee on the Debbie Reynolds Trust.
Right.
So he was making sure that everything, overseeing, I guess is a good way to put it.
Right. And that might explain the January 3rd wire fee is when you had actually transferred that money from.
It could.
Yeah. And if you can go to Exhibit J,
Okay, where is that in the pile?
there should be an order, so it's about a third of the way from the back.
Okay, I see L. Oh, so JKL maybe. J. You said there's a lot of J's here. So
Yeah.
how many J's am I looking for?
And just go to page 1.
Okay,
Yeah,
I got it.
yeah.
It's okay if I break this open? Can I open this?
Yeah.
It's hard for me to.
You can keep that. That's
Okay,
fine.
no, it's easier to flip it.
Yeah. And this is the Chase account you just talked about. True?
Yes,
And you opened this up perhaps to receive the proceeds from profiles. Is that true?
it's possible. I mean, like I said, so if it's a Todd account, that's just my personal
Yeah.
account. So I wouldn't have opened, that would have already been there probably. But I'm not exactly sure. But we opened up new accounts for the different entities right after we were doing this distribution.
And then on the first thing, it shows like zero balance on
Right.
page 1, and then an entry deposit of 50. Does that
Yeah, so that would-
refresh your memory as to when you opened the account up?
Well, I mean, that would tell the story to me.
Yeah. And then it shows that you actually had received the first payment or a payment on September 15th, or excuse me, on July 15th.
Are we on the same page still?
Yes.
Yeah, I see that, the 200,000.
Yeah. And that was approximately like 1 month and 10 days after the first auction, true?
That would have been just after now. So the first auction, is the year on here? 11. So we're in, yeah, so that's, is that, that's inside the wire. Remember what I mentioned? There was $1 million though, advance.
Right.
So this may be part of the advance.
Okay, I got you. And then the address on this new account that you opened up on about July 5th is your Creston, California.
Yes, because that's where the
True.
bookkeeper and David were.
And then it looks like if you go to page 3, it looks like on or about the same date, you actually opened up a savings account as well. Is that true?
Let's see. I've got the dates here. Where is the date? I think the date's kind of blocked here. Well, 1971 is still my personal checking account.
Okay.
So it stands to reason that's still my savings account.
Okay, fair enough. And, okay, great. And then, and just to confirm what you said earlier, if you go to page 6, it shows you receiving additional income from profiles, true?
Well, yeah, down here at the
Yeah.
bottom, yes.
Yeah. And then, just to go back to what you were talking about earlier,
You understand how the process was
Yeah.
working here, though? The accountants had to do the breakdown first.
right,
That's why it would have been a delay.
Yeah.
This didn't happen immediately because they're trying to figure out who gets what.
who gets what? Yeah, I understand. And then, this will be the last page I think we'll look at. If you go to page 8,
Okay?
that shows you receiving the money and also making distributions to your mother, true?
Well, yes, it has her name there on that one, and the other one, it's a transfer over. Maybe that's part of the same transaction. I'm not sure, but yes, we definitely were distributing money at that point. I'm trying to think now. This is well. Do you want me to get into the Carey Trust thing? So the question is, I assume we're talking about possibly the subway dress revenue here at this point.
No, I'm just trying to clarify just the chain of control.
Oh, I see.
You've already testified to the fact that you received the money and then you distributed it out. I'm just trying to figure out now, when you made direct payments to Debbie, what was that for?
Oh, well-
Versus you paying First Bank for another
Well, as you-
distribution.
Excuse me.
Yeah.
I almost did it. Once the determination was made by the accountants that something needed to be distributed a certain way, then I would react accordingly. These were not unilateral decisions made by me. The money is sent to me. I was sort of distributing it, including, as you'll see, to Carrie and other people as well, especially the people that had consigned things or whatever. But yes, I'm the mediator of all the distributions.
So, in light of bank the records and reflecting when you received the money and where it went out, why did you choose to produce Exhibit 30 to demonstrate that as opposed to just providing the bank with the records?
You're saying I gave you 30?
Yeah,
Okay. So you want me to look at 30?
yeah, Exhibit 30, we've already looked at that. That's the,
Oh,
yeah.
what?
That's the last 2 pages.
Well, let me, you mean that's all I gave you?
Yes, you didn't give any bank 30-day records and reflecting when you had received the money and when you had distributed it. You only
Well,
gave us this.
Again, these would have been, anything requested like that clearly would be done through my account.
Okay.
So I don't generate spreadsheets like that, but just not to say I don't know how to read it. I'm just saying that that's not, it would be requested by me possibly. If Dennis King were to request a distribution and money was coming in, there'd be a powwow and the distribution would be arranged. But there would have been a spreadsheet generally there's more spreadsheets around than that.
Yeah.
That can't be the only spreadsheet.
Yeah, let me state the question again.
Let me just ask you the quick question though.
Yeah.
Is that the only spreadsheet you've got? Or
No.
distributions?
No.
Okay.
But this is the spreadsheet that you provided to demonstrate when you received the funds from the auction house.
I see. I'm sure it was just trying to say this is an example of.
Okay,
Let me just clarify, funds from the auction house for 2012.
2012.
That was the specific question asked by the board.
2012.
So obviously that's, in 12, now we're talking about the subway dress now though. Once you get to 12.
No,
Okay? Oh, because none of the the first auction proceeds would have been delivered in 11.
yeah, I understand that, but when asked to produce documents demonstrating when you received the income from the auction house, you provided Exhibit 30.
Just one sheet of paper.
Yes,
Well, I would, if I were you, I wouldn't have been happy with that.
yeah.
I would have asked for more. I did not know that's all you got.
Oh.
But maybe we were thinking you just wanted an example
Yeah.
of how the distributions are made, not every transaction.
I don't believe that I was the one that asked for it.
No, I don't mean you.
I thought the Office of Tax Appeal asked for that
I didn't mean
information.
you individually, but
Okay.
it seems to me that a request should have been made for more detail. To me, I would have said, this is an example of how we did the distribution.
Okay.
If you want to see all the distributions, I remember there being a conversation going way back, long before you, where we were like, well, wait a minute, what do these other entities have to do with any of this, and are you really entitled to all this other information? That did come up at one point. I don't know if that short-circuited some further spreadsheets, but I can tell you I've seen many more spreadsheets than that one.
Sticking with Exhibit 30 for a minute, Exhibit 30 shows that you had received a distribution of $1 million from the trust. Did you report that $1 million on your 2012 tax return?
I'm not sure when it was reported. That would have been up to David to decide how
Okay.
and when.
Okay.
I mean, you got to remember, all of this is a long time ago, and I
Sure.
don't remember the sequence of events. It would have been reported when appropriately
Okay.
by him.
So would you be surprised to find out that that $1 million was not reported on your 2012 income tax return?
Not necessarily, because
I'm going to object to that. That lacks truth. I mean, there's no facts and evidence that establish that. As we heard Mr. Fisher testify, some of the income that he earned in 2012 was consignment income, and that is clearly indicated in Mr. DeSalvo's records. All that full $1 million was not allocable fully to Todd, as he has explained. So the Panavision camera that he specifically pointed out was a consignment camera, to which he had to turn around and pay that individual part of those proceeds.
Well, your objection is not well taken. And Mr. Fisher, if you will go to the last page, the first
Mr.
line.
Hofstall?
Yes.
And appellants, if we could just keep it civil,
Sure.
and then also, if we could maybe get to the point of this Exhibit 30 discussion, that
Sure.
would be great.
Yeah. On the last page,
yes,
it reflects that you received $1 million from the liquidating trust, true?
yes, I see that.
Yeah. And my question to you is, did you report that $1 million on your 2012 tax return?
I have no idea. You'd have to ask David DeSalvo.
And we will. Thank you. You can move to Exhibit E, which is your tax returns. It's the first page.
First page. That's easy. Yeah. I like that.
And page 5.
Okay.
On line 5 of the Form CA 540NR, you reported that you were in California for a total of 13 days. Were you truthful when you made that statement?
At the time this was made, that would have been my understanding without doing a forensic analysis like we might have done later.
But it's true that you spent much more than 13 days in California.
I can't say
in
that for
2010.
sure. I can't say that. I mean, I'd have to go back and look at some of the documents. You know, the calendars that were generated later would probably be a better representation.
So if those calendars reflected that you were that you produced that you were actually in California for well over 150 days, which they do you agree that it was an error for you to report that you were in California for 13 days on your California CA 540NR?
What I would say is that David DeSalvo was unaware of the amount of time the preparation was taking for the second auction, because now we're talking about the second auction.
This is 2010, so this is before even the first auction?
Yeah, there's no way I spent that much time there, so that's a mistake.
So you're saying you spent less than 13 days in?
No, I'm saying that other number you tossed was very big. For 10, it's impossible.
Okay.
It would be totally impossible just based on my driving calendar alone that I could have even had that many spare days.
But you do agree that it was way more than 13 days?
I don't agree. I would have to look. I can't say where I sit. As I've had a chance, as you know, to evaluate the calendar years ago. I haven't seen that calendar in 12 years.
Okay.
But what I remember is we spent quite a bit of time trying to make that calendar accurate because it was asked of us to do so. When this document was prepared, there was discussions between David and I that we would have had typical of any tax year, and that's how this form was generated. I don't fill these out, as you can imagine.
Okay. If you can go to line 7 of that same page,
Yes?
it reflects that you had salary and wages of $72,800.
Sure.
And you sourced all of that income to California, true?
If he put it there, then this was I believe the time where my mother was actually paying me. I think that money probably came from Raymax Productions or one of her production companies. But if he put it on a California return, there's a reason. It's there for a reason. I'm not going to challenge that.
So in other words, you earned that income while working in California, true?
My mother paid me from a California production company, so it probably was done because that's where it came from. I wouldn't say I was in California earning that money because I was traveling a lot, bringing things back and forth too.
And if you can turn to page 8. Excuse me, page 7.
7.
Now, this is Form FTB 4803E, which is what somebody files and when they claim head of household. In 2010, you claimed head of household for Brandon Ramostella Rivers, true?
Yes.
Okay. And on box 6, you acknowledge in that he lived the entire year with you in 2010, true?
Yes, he lived on the ranch.
Yeah. But question 6 asks, did your qualifying person live with you the entire year in 2010? And you checked yes, true?
Well, that would not be entirely true because I was traveling most of that year. So he was living on my property, and that's what I interpreted that to mean. He was a dependent of mine living on the ranch, taking care of the ranch, stepson. That's who he was. So he was living there. So no, he was not living with me. Again, these are semantics, and if you use these words, you could take that several ways. He's not traveling with me while I'm traveling. I was not in California very often. When I was on the ranch, then he would have been with me.
I certainly understand that. There's also an explanation that you are outside for a temporary or transitory purpose, and that's why it was okay to check that box.
I know you'd like to think that, but by this point, I was already living in Las Vegas. I mean, we were already well into our relationship. I know that's where you're going. That's your job to try to take us there.
I'm just trying to understand your tax return and why you took positions that might be inconsistent.
Well, I think it's also important.
Hi.
Hi there.
Let's just move forward, please.
Okay.
If you can go to page 15.
15. Got it.
Yeah. And on that page, you identified yourself as a museum executive, true? On the bottom?
Yes. Well, yeah, I see it. Yes.
And the museum was at Creston Ranch during the 2010 tax year, true?
The Hollywood Motion Picture Museum
Yeah.
was, but the museum was in Tennessee.
And then if you can
The
go
storage facility was in Creston, as you know.
if you can go to page 17.
I'm with you.
Okay. This is a profit and loss from business for Fisher Electric, true?
True.
And it shows that you had gross receipts of $51,863, true?
I see that.
Now, there was some indication that in your declaration and in the brief that you hadn't done any electrical work since 2018 or so on a solar day project, true?
True.
How do you explain a $51,863 gross receipts for Fisher Electric in 2010?
Because Fisher Electric did consulting as well. You don't have to build anything. I'm an electrical engineer, so I can tell you how to do something, and that costs money too.
Sure. You can go to page 39.
Yep.
We're now in the 2011 tax year.
Okay.
On line 5, you say that you were in California for any purpose for 75 days, true?
I see that.
Was that an accurate reflection of how many days you were in California for 2011?
I would say when this was filled out, that was exactly what we thought.
And then, again, you have wages. I'm on line 7 now. Again, and you have the wages of $72,800.
I see that.
And you sourced all of that to California, true?
If it's on a California return, then I have to say yes.
Go to page 41. And this is basically the same FTB 4803E.
I'm with you.
And again, on line 6, you checked the box and that he lived with you for the entire year, true?
We checked the box, but he lived on the ranch, not with me.
If you go to page 48, which is your federal return.
48?
Yes.
Okay, got it.
And just to make it clear, is you had identified 2 dependents, and both of those dependents were living on the ranch, true? Both?
Yes, both of
Brandon
them were
and-
taking care of the ranch.
And again, if you look at box number 4 above, you claimed head of household for that in year as well, true?
Yes.
Go to page 68.
Got it.
Page 68 and reflects at least the auction proceeds from the first auction.
Okay.
The question I have was, it's my understanding that the Ascot dress sold for $3.7 million.
Correct.
And that would have to be reflected on either one of these categories, A or B, true?
Assuming the money was paid in this tax period, yes.
And looking at the property A and property B, there's only one category that the Ascot the dress would flow into, and that would be property B, true?
Let me see if that's, yeah, so it's in B. Isn't that where it is?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I'm asking you.
Well,
because-
as any taxpayer will tell you, even though I'm a fairly intelligent guy, these forms are very complicated. Now, I can read numbers, so I see on line 24 there's a $3.7 million entry. Is that correct? Line 24.
Yes.
So the gross income from all the items sold at the auction was 4.1. That's the way I read this.
Okay.
And then he subtracted basis, et cetera. And that's how we got down to the 3.7.
So the question I have for you is, if you look at above that in section the 19, it has a margin,
I see it.
and you identified property B as being museum rental property, true?
Oh, yes, we had both. And the reason why that is because all of the things that were owned outside of the nonprofit were going to be rented to Tennessee for the museum. So every single item, every costume that was owned by DR Studios, myself, my mother, anything outside of the 501c3 was going to be rented back. We started an LLC by the name of TD Productions, short for Todd and Debbie. TD Productions was going to be a limited liability company for rental purposes of museum artifacts to the new museum in Tennessee.
Now, this is 2011, and by 2011, the whole Tennessee project was pretty much gone, true?
Yes, but the intent was always that David had already established the idea that, David DeSalvo, the accountant, had already established the idea that we were going to be in the memorabilia rental and the memorabilia sales department. And we, to this day, are. I'm renting things right now, as I mentioned, to the Sphere in Las Vegas. So rental was always an intent for the things that you were going to hold on to. And we were also going to sell things. We're very good at, we broke 3 Guinness World Records in selling some of the memorabilia that we sold. It was very successful. We're good at selling, but we're also pretty good at preserving and renting the stuff as well.
And if you could move to Exhibit 79.
Okay.
I'm sorry. Where is Exhibit
Oh,
79?
I'm sorry, page 79, I'm sorry.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Exhibit E,
I just
page 79.
assumed he meant 79 page.
Yeah.
I'm with you.
Okay. And on line 5, when you identify the amount of days and you were in California, you identified 0.
There's no days put in there at all.
So did you spend days in California in 2012?
I'm sure there were some days.
And then on line 7 is the first time, and we're showing some of the income being sourced to Las Vegas, true?
So we're at 12. What was happening in 12? Yeah, I mean, it just depends. I mean, I consult with people all over the country. It was up to David to decide, how it would be sourced to what part of the return. I see he's got capital gains in there. So by 12, is 13 the second auction? You think that's where we are at that point?
Yeah, I think we're.
Okay.
I think we're around there.
Okay.
If you can go to page 91.
Got it?
This is your federal return, true?
Yes.
And you identified Eugene Shuglet as a dependent again, true?
True.
And during 2012, this is the first year you filed a married return, true?
True. Even though it was only 9 days.
Yeah.
But we're not going to let that go.
Yeah. Did Eugene live with you for the entire year?
No, he lived on the farm.
Now, if you can go to line 13 of this form,
Okay.
Where it shows capital gain.
Yes.
It shows capital gain of $582,180, true?
True.
Now, I want to go back to Exhibit 30. And
Exhibit 30.
the point that it's the last page of the packet I gave you.
Right. You're saying it's not going to reflect all that detail. Is that where you were going? Is this 30?
Yeah.
That one?
Yes. So is that $1 million reflected in the capital gain?
I don't think that has anything to do with that. I don't think they're connected.
So
First of all, David doesn't work in round numbers like this unless there's a reason to. So when you see on a tax return an odd number like that 582,180, that's an accountant's entry. I mean, he's done some work to get to that. So that's been a calculated number. This number up here is a worksheet on how to allocate and distribute funds. This is not a tax return. This is a worksheet for how he was. So there was times where there were issues of how to distribute the funds. So you have an auction. Who owns what? Okay, we've got to go back to the database, find out who owns what. And this went on for quite some time. It was not an instantaneous thing. They worked on it for months. That's why there's sometimes a delay past the payment period. The money might have sat and couldn't be distributed until we could get an accurate accounting of where it belonged.
So just to be clear, this Exhibit 30 that you produced in response to the Office of Tax Appeal, in your opinion, is not an accurate reflection of the amount of money you received?
I'm saying it's part of a worksheet. It's part of a profit and loss detail. It is not complete, I can assure you. I mean, I know there were more pages than this, and I know that's part of a worksheet, which I've seen. This is very typical of something that would come pre-tax filing to discuss distribution of income.
Now, if you go to page 105, and you may not have a copy of that here, because I don't know if I have it on mine. But
Well,
Exhibit E, page 105, you may need to pull it up.
I don't
Maybe
have
you
that.
can on
It
that.
stops at 90.
Yeah. If you could pull it up on yours.
No wonder you have a 6-inch notebook. Seven,
105.
6, 5. She's got it. I see it. Yeah, I see it.
Okay. Now, in order to get the money that was identified on Schedule D, it shows on line 10 that you received $312,000. Do you see that?
I see it.
And the-
Sorry,
and
I didn't talk in the microphone.
And the cost of basis of that is zero, true?
That is a zero.
Okay. And then your overall gain is $264,898, true?
264,000,
Yeah.
yeah.
So that $1 million gain from Exhibit 30 is not reflected on Schedule D as far as you know.
Once again, they're not connected. I mean, they're indirectly connected, and one is a form being used to try to figure out what is supposed to be where, what is, I mean, clearly he's working on distributions of capital here. The tax forms have to be used, obviously, as the Holy Grail, because you're definitive by you hit this point. Unless you have an amended tax return, that's it.
Right. But the distribution, you agree, would be taxable income, true?
Of course.
So if you received $1 million, it should be reflected on your 2012 tax return, true?
I'm sure as I said, these are worksheets. He's estimating that amount. Now, you can ask David if it's this amount plus the other amount does come up to roughly $1 million. Maybe that's what he's doing here. Maybe he's saying those two together is $1 million, so we're looking at $1 million. But I don't know. You're going to have to ask David. I did not generate this sheet.
Okay.
I've looked at a lot of them.
So is it your opinion that your tax return would be more accurate than what you produced as Exhibit 30?
Well, it's certain, as I say, tax returns, in my view, are definitive,
Okay.
barring someone filing an amended tax return, that they would be definitive.
If you can go to page 121.
Is that in hers, or do I have that?
You may need to look on that. I'm sorry.
I'm going to interrupt,
Sure.
actually. So my understanding is that the assessed amount isn't actually in dispute. It's the question of whether it's sourcing in a California source income and whether Mr. Fisher was a California resident. And
That's true.
I just want to make sure that we are staying on track with respect to the actual things that are in dispute in this appeal. And it's unclear to me where we're going with this, and I want to make sure we have enough time to get through it.
Sure. And I certainly understand that. I just wanted to have a record of the fact that there's a date, January 20th, and the question is whether or not the money may have been received before or after that date. The only document in the record that supports a date of receiving those documents prior to January 20th is the Exhibit 30.
And may I point out, Exhibit 30 was produced in direct response to the OTA's question regarding when payment was physically received by Mr. Fisher, hence why that one-page or two-page, I think it is, exhibit was provided. It has nothing to do with what was reported on the tax return. It's literally in direct response to the questions that we received as to what was the date of receipt of payment, and our position is Todd's received that payment, and I think it was April, whatever the date is. That's the only relevance of this particular document. It's got nothing to do with the reporting of the tax return.
Okay, and yeah, I think we understand FTV's position that this $1 million wasn't reported.
Okay.
Let's move on, please.
Okay. And just one more question on the tax return, and I apologize, this is a little bit more date relevant. And I'm looking at page 121.
You can let David answer that one.
And if you can just give us an understanding of what sale of display items were. What did you actually sell,
Okay.
if it's in that category, sale of display
Sale of
items?
display items, I see the dates, the amount, gross sales, 391.
Yeah.
So in the collection, there are mannequins, display cases. Every single display had a video monitor. It also had video playback devices that went with it. Set decorations, trims, stages, risers, platforms. There's a lot of apparatus that goes into presenting a museum in a 25,000 square foot building, which is what the Paley Center was. So much of that belonged to us. Some of it was probably liquidated.
And prior to the Poly auction, where was all of this risers and all this stuff?
A lot of it was actually purchased for the Paley Center and then sold after, because we were not going to do a museum. It was just bought for the purposes of the museum.
And you received a profit based on those items you bought for the Poly
Well,
auction?
it's hard to say. There's no way he's going to report a profit unless
Yeah.
there was one. So I'm assuming there's enough things in here where there was things that were being calculated in there that did show a profit.
Because if you go to line 24, it just shows a gain. That's what
Well,
I'm asking.
I'm very good at buying things at auction.
Okay.
So a lot of things that I do buy are at auction, and then when I flip them, this argument goes on between Dave and I a lot, I can assure you.
Could we take a break for a couple minutes?
Well, we're actually going to take a break at 4:30,
4:30?
so
Okay.
we should just power through.
Sure. Okay, now I want to talk a little bit about the homes at 1700 and 1720 Coldwater Canyon Road.
Sure.
Who owned the 1700 address?
At what point?
2010, 2011, 2012.
Kerry.
And who owned 1720?
Eventually, my mother bought it from whoever the realtor, I don't know the prior owner, but my mother bought it later. That would have been later.
Right. And what year did your mother purchase 1720?
I don't know the exact date. It was the latter end of the, I guess, I don't know the exact date. I'd be reaching. This is so long ago.
Other than the owners of 1700 and 1720, is there anybody else who lived at those properties?
Well, 1700, Carrie's house, was purchased by me and then moved into, and then I don't put it into the Carrie Fisher Living Trust. That happened in 12. You probably know this better than I do. I don't remember the exact date. That was done because my mother was very concerned about Carrie's mental illness and was concerned that she could lose the house. So it was determined that if we paid off the mortgage on the house and then we contributed the house to a trust, no matter what happened, Carrie couldn't lose her house. That was really important to my mother in her latter days, especially after the auction. She wanted to make sure Carrie was settled. So in that respect, it was owned by me for a minute, and it was then owned by eventually, to this day, it's still owned by the trust.
But my question was, who, other than the owners, who occupied that?
Oh, who occupied that with? Nobody lived with Carrie. And my mother had a personal assistant that lived with her later, much later on, and he's kind of a house sitter as well. His name was Donald Light, L-I-G-H-T. I'm treating you right over there.
And when did Donald Light move into or live in 1720?
So Donald Light ran the gift shop at the hotel from 1994 through 1997 or 8. And when that was over, he assisted in moving and closing everything down. And then he became my mother's personal assistant. He didn't live with her, though, until she purchased that Coldwater house. Then he became sort of the house sitter. He also moved things around for my mother all the time. So he would have been responsible. If my mother, say, is coming home to a certain house, he would be responsible to move the things she needed to that house. That could include the ruby slippers or anything that my mother might want. And those things got moved around a lot.
Going back to the two properties in your the license as an electrical contractor, did you ever perform any electrical work on either of those homes that required you to pull a permit from the city of Los Angeles?
Not that I recall. I did do something for my mother's house where we upgraded her panel. So I might have pulled a permit for her panel, possibly. We did change her electrical panel on that house. It was old from the 1930s.
Yeah. And looking at the permit, it looks like that was done in 2006.
Oh, so it did happen. See,
Yeah.
there you go.
And that happened in 2006, about 2006.
That
true?
could be.
Right. So, again, going back.
Actually, the 6 might have been something I might have done for Carrie.
Okay.
because Carrie also had to have a panel upgrade because her house was built in 1932.
Okay. Okay. And that would have been around the same time when you pulled the permits, like?
No,
2006?
Debbie's was after.
Okay.
It was, we had a blackout during one of Carrie's birthday parties, and that required immediate intervention.
Yeah.
So that's how that happened.
Right. So in light of that, would you change any of your prior testimony with regards to when the last time you worked under your contractor's permit?
No, because I don't consider working for family business work. I didn't get paid for it. I should have charged her, but I didn't.
Did pull a permit, though.
I
true?
did. You have to do that when you're going to disconnect the
Okay.
utility, so you know how
Yeah.
I go work.
And you used your contractor's license in order to get the permit to do that work, true?
I've maintained that license since the 80s, yes. I still have that license active.
I want to talk a little bit, you had mentioned it earlier about the Bright Lights
Sure,
documentary.
sure.
If you go to our exhibit AA, just take a look at it. You may know and may not.
Where is that in
need to
the pile?
refresh it. It's right before your exhibit 30.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Got it.
Bright Lights was nominated in the Emmys for, let me take a look at the year. 2017 for
Documentary,
true?
Yeah.
And nonfiction programming and all that kind of stuff, true?
yes,
Yeah.
correct.
And there's no doubt in your mind that it was a documentary, true?
I used to say that it really is a documentary. It doesn't conform to all of the rules of a documentary, but we do allow the penguins to get eaten by the sharks in the story, which means that we expose a lot of truth that would otherwise be uncomfortable. So I would say it is in many ways, it conforms to a true long-form documentary.
Sure. And prior to premiering on Cinemax.
HBO.
Or HBO, it was on various festivals, including the Hot Springs Documentary Film Festival, true?
Yeah, it went to
Cannes
30,
and
yeah, a
Colorado
lot of
and
places.
A bunch of places, true, yeah. A couple of quotes from the movie, as you're aware of, and this is in Bright Lights at the 4-minute and 14-minute mark, and your sister Carrie said, "Mother and I live next door to each other, separated by one daunting hill. I usually come to her house. I always come to her."
I always come
Always
to her.
come
She
to her.
says it twice.
She says it twice.
Yeah, I
True.
know that scene.
So was your sister truthful when she said that she was living next door to each other?
So as I testified earlier, this is later in my mother's life where she's very ill. She cannot travel and tour as much, and she is spending considerably more time with Carrie. And in the literal sense, they were separated by a daunting hill. And it's true, Carrie did have to come to her because my mother was not in good enough physical condition to make the hill up to Carrie's house, which was tough. It's a big hill.
Yeah.
But at this point, they're becoming, pretty good friends. And as I testified, it was a nice thing to see after decades of struggle.
And then at the 30-minute, 38-second mark, you were quoted as saying, "My mother's always liked the idea of living in the compound. It has actually turned out pretty good. She has been there a very long time, and they've obviously survived the decades of being there." Do you recall saying that?
Sure.
Were you truthful when you said that?
Well, which compound do you think I'm talking about?
The
There are three.
the canyon, the place where Carrie was living and your mom.
Well, I know what
Yeah.
what you want it to
Yeah.
be, but what I'm telling you is I'm not referring
Okay.
I'm referring to generically speaking the compound living that my mother liked.
Okay.
My mother, in effect, built compounds in 3 locations. Carrie's house was one of the compounds. Vegas was a compound. Carrie spent a lot of time in
Yeah.
Vegas, especially as my mom got ill and had a stroke. Carrie moved into our house. In fact, to this day, I have Carrie's bed in one of my bedrooms there because she had moved in there as well. So what I'm talking about in that documentary is My mother loved the compound lifestyle. She always did. And she was spending a lot more time with Carrie because of that. And because she was so ill, she was able to spend more time with her. So I'm not really challenging what I said, but I'm telling you there are 3 compounds. So this is part of what we were talking about in the early part of my testimony, or her testimony, Lydia's testimony as well. When we say house, we mean something perhaps different than your traditional definition that you might use. When I say compound, I said to you what? Which one? That's all I'm saying. You can't assume that I was only referring to the Vegas one.
And we all agree that the bright lights reflects the living situation at the time it was filmed between your mom and your sister, true?
I've said before that was the time they spent the most time together. She traveled the least,
Okay.
but she was spending more time there than ever. I mean, you guys have pretty good records, I know, because you're
Yeah.
bringing up some obscure stuff. So you
Yeah.
know my mom's schedule. You certainly know her tax returns for decades. And you probably know off the top of your head, how many years was she a Nevada resident? Probably like 50. It's a lot. It's a big number.
We have to take our break here, but before we do, similar to my reminder to Mr. Fisher, I do want to point out that we set aside 2.5 hours for cross-examination. We are at the hour mark now. I do want to make sure that you have the time that you have time to ask questions of the other witnesses. So if we could take a 15-minute break and we come back, hopefully we'll wrap up cross-examination of Mr. Fisher. We will go till 5:30 this evening, so we hopefully will have time for redirect, and also I know that I have questions, and I'm sure that my co-panelists have questions as well. So it's perhaps an ambitious schedule for the next hour, but we'll do what we can.
Let's go
okay?
for it.
I will see everyone at 4:45. Is everyone ready to proceed? Ms. Alonso, are you all set to go back on the record? Yes, Judge. All right, let's reopen the record. Mr. Hofstall, I realize I kind of missed the line on our last break, so in this case, action.
Fair enough. We're done with our questions for Mr. Fisher.
Thank you. Would you like to do redirect?
The only issue that we have is the question of the specific pieces of memorabilia that are being sourced to Todd. There's no disagreement in terms of who owns what. There's obvious disagreement in terms of where these things were. Todd can go through this item by item and identify what was where. That process will take some significant time. So we prefer, if FTB would agree, to allow us to simply submit a declaration where Todd says Lot 1, Vegas, Lot 10, Creston, Lot 15, Tennessee, just so we don't have to walk through this whole procedure.
Or hit the highlights.
Well, I have already teed you up to do the ones valued over $10,000, but again, that would still leave some of the smaller items out there. So I'm curious if FTB would be willing to allow us to do that via declaration so we don't have to walk through every single item and where our position is in terms of where it was located.
When you say declaration, what exactly do you mean?
Just to supplement this record with a statement from Todd saying Lot 1, June 2011 auction was located in Creston. Lot 10, 2011 auction was located in Vegas. Just so I don't have to put him through, walking through those paces now.
Yeah, I mean, I think.
And then obviously you would have an opportunity if you wanted to challenge it or come back for additional information.
Yeah. I don't think we would object to that if the panel wanted to go forward with. I think that would involve keeping the record open.
Yes.
If you think that would be the most efficient way to do that, I think that at this point, maybe there's another solution that we could come up with is that we say, we're talking about items that were above 500,000 or something along those lines, or 200 and above, because I think that's just a significantly smaller number. We could do that.
And that's the problem I'm dealing with, just so that you guys understand. We have about 15 to 20 items that are valued more than $10,000, which we could easily deal with. There's another 100 or so that are $200 posters here, there, everywhere. So that's my concern. I don't want the record to be completely deplete of what our position is on the location of these, because as Mr. Fisher testified, we do acknowledge that some of these smaller items, some of the easier compactable things, primarily posters, some of that was maintained in Creston. So we don't want there to be this perception we're all or nothing here, that if we end up having to try and source this, we want to make sure the record is clear in terms of what the agreements are between us on that sourcing. And I think maybe it sounds like we could discuss this overnight and maybe get a resolution that way.
I think so. I think that we could certainly do that if the interest is to try to close the record tomorrow as well.
Okay, yeah, that sounds like a good idea. I also, Ms. Swain, if you could speak a little closer to the microphone when you talk into it.
Sorry, Judge.
It's all right. And then I do want to ask, though, follow-up. I understand your position with respect to bringing items in California for the purpose of the sale does not constitute being located in California for the purposes of reporting income taxes. But is there any dispute that the items were physically in California at the time of the auction?
There is none. Every item that is identified as allocable to Todd was located in California for purposes of the auction during 2011. Yes.
Okay, thank you. Did you have any further redirect then?
We do not based on examination.
Okay, then very quickly, I am going to turn things over to my co-panelists and see if they have any questions. Hearing Officer Parker, do you have any questions?
I have no questions at this time.
Thank you. Judge Gass, do you have any questions?
I'll ask questions tomorrow that are related to the tax return stuff. Thank you.
I do have a few questions. My understanding is, Mr. Fisher and Ms. Hickland, you re-met in early 2010, is that correct?
Yes.
And then the timestamp on the photo is, for your move-in date photo, is April 20th, 2010, and then Ms. Hickland's Las Vegas home sells May 2011. I'm presuming you resided in, or at least you're asserting that you resided in Ms. Hickland's home during that period of April 20th through May 2011?
Yes.
Okay. And then earlier you mentioned that you prepaid the lease for the Dornosh.
Once her house sold,
Okay.
I prepaid the lease on that myself.
And then is the lease paperwork or any record of the prepayment in the exhibits?
We tried to find that at one point. I'm not saying it's, we ended up holding on to a lot of things you normally wouldn't hold on to because of this ongoing endless, amount of time. So we did keep records way past. So there could be something. But I think, she can testify to the same thing. Hopefully that would be adequate. But, that is what happened. I mean, we could track it somehow maybe. But when it first came up, I want to say, I don't know if you were involved or not, but somebody from the FTB brought that up a while ago. And we were not able to find it way early on in the investigation. But this is like 14, 13.
Sure, I understand. And then I just want to turn my attention. I believe that it was answered, but I just want to verify regarding your stepson that he definitely lived in California 2010 and 2011 because he lived at the ranch, right?
Yes.
Okay. And then my understanding of the contentions here is that the bankruptcy court required you to have the auction in California. Is that accurate?
Actually, they wanted me to manage. That was the order, the written order from the judge was that I manage the affair and that we choose an auctioneer. That had to be approved by the court and also by the creditors. So 4 different auction houses were provided as alternates, and I gave my opinion as an expert in that field, and the court said, we want to go with what you think is best. You're the best person to manage this. And that's when I got essentially stuck managing it. And I'm not complaining about the fact that I had to manage it, because in the end, I was the best person to make sure that we maximized the value the way that we did.
Okay, and then, so then, initially, the bankruptcy provided a plan to use Christie's. Was that just not one of the options that was allowed by the court, or?
That was one of the four that submitted. Sotheby's, Christie's, Profiles, and Heritage all submitted plans. The best deal, the long and the short of it is 0% seller commission, pretty much unheard of. So the seller, now the buyers who bought had a commission that they had to pay, but the sellers normally get charged up to 20% or more. It depends on the situation, but minimum 10, 15%. We had a 0% seller's fee for selling in this auction. That's remarkable. That was a deal that was hard to come by.
Okay. And then I just want to ask just a clarifying question. I'm sorry to turn our attention back to the tax returns. But so with the 2011 return, you did report 75 days, and then you provided a calendar showing 151 days. Is there an explanation for those differences?
Well, when these tax returns are put in front of me, it was long before anybody asked to generate a calendar. So at the time that tax return was done, I'm sure that was our best understanding at that moment. If I generated a calendar later that showed the 150, which I can't, I'd have to see the document. I'm sure you might have it somewhere, but I would say the only time I spent that much time in California was due to the auction, because I can guarantee you in 2010, not a chance. I mean, I just showed you pictures where we were all over the country month after month after month after being in Vegas before that. I mean, there's just no chance. So if that's truly what it reflects, then that would be inaccurate, and I'd have to look at that again, but I would be surprised. And 12, during the auction period, when we were building the auction up, building the museum in Paley Center, it wouldn't shock me if I spent that much time in California. I had no option.
Okay.
Hey, Judge Long, can I just clarify with FTB what exhibit they're referring to when they reference this 150 days claimed by Todd as residency?
It's in the packet. I believe it's Exhibit L.
Exhibit L? And that's a Todd calendar? That's
L
not
is the blog posts,
Yeah.
actually.
Yeah.
Oh, no, excuse me, I'll look it up. It's in the packet I provided to Mr. Fisher. I believe it is, bear with me a moment.
I did see a calendar somewhere.
It's the colored Exhibit I, I'm sorry.
So,
Thank you, Ron.
Yes.
I'd be happy to, I haven't seen this document in 10 plus years. I'd be happy to look it over and see what it is. A lot of trouble went into generating this calendar later at the request of FTB. So I would suggest that the calendar is accurate and was generated against receipts and different things that we used at the time. However, if I found something on that calendar that subsequently did not reflect the photo record, which I didn't get into till recently, we generated these photo inventory, timeline, as it were. Then I would have to refer to the photos as being the definitive guide. Whatever we used here compared to that, I mean, this to me is a pretty solid source. Those are date and time stamps on the photographs. Good or bad, they are what they are.
Okay, thank you. I don't have any further questions. What I think at this time we should do, Ms. Hickland, you'll be here tomorrow, right? I don't think we have time to do a full witness testimony and cross-examination in the next half hour. So let's call it a night. We will come back tomorrow and we will hear from Ms. Hickland and then the other witnesses. And yes, that concludes our hearing for the day. We will resume at 9:30 tomorrow, Thursday, October 16th, 2025. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Judge
you.
Long.
And then we say, scene. That's right.
And cut.
Cut. That's right.